Let's mark our anniversary with an adventure, I suggested to my hardworking husband. He deserved a break, and I was eager to indulge us both. For our first anniversary, I spared no expense, booking us a lavish room in a celebrity-frequented luxury hotel. It was a gesture aimed solely at bringing joy to my husband's heart, yet little did I know it would set the stage for everything that followed. Let's rewind a year back. At 28, I found myself married to Logan at 26 without the traditional dating preamble. Ours was what you might call a zero-day marriage. We crossed paths on a dating app, a decision I made impulsively one tipsy evening. Initially skeptical of the digital dating world, I found myself drawn in by its tales of the unknown, fueled by lingering drinks and curiosity. Amidst a sea of conversations that often fizzled out, Logan stood out. After a month of daily exchanges, we agreed to meet, and from the moment we did, it felt like reconnecting with an old friend. On our first meeting, Logan proposed the idea of dating with marriage in mind, and despite my reservations, I went along with it. It was swift, perhaps too swift, but there was an undeniable pull between us. Before long, we were arranging family meetings, caught up in the whirlwind of our budding relationship. Looking back, I see now the signs I missed, the subtle cues that hinted at what was to come. As we gathered for the family meeting at Logan's home, his excitement was palpable. "Mom, I've brought home my future wife," he announced proudly. Though I felt a twinge of self-consciousness, his mother Grace and sister Lily matched his enthusiasm, setting the stage for the next chapter of our story. As we exchanged pleasantries, Grace warmly greeted me, dispelling any formality. "Let's drop the formalities," she said with a smile. "We're becoming family after all." Her words filled me with warmth, reassured by the prospect of joining such a welcoming family. The tension dissolved instantly, replaced by a sense of familiarity that made it seem as though we'd known each other for years. Just as I was basking in the newfound ease, Lily posed an unexpected question. "So, how much do you make a year?" she inquired, her curiosity bordering on intrusive. Logan swiftly intervened, offering an explanation. "I've just started a new job, so it's entry-level for me. Cho's been a nurse for 8 years, so she earns about twice as much," he explained, a hint of pride in his voice. Grace's response caught me off guard. "Wow, you're rich. What a fortunate marriage," she exclaimed, patting Logan's shoulder approvingly. Although his modesty belied the situation, I couldn't shake the unease that crept in. The absence of Logan's father for the past 5 years meant they relied on Lily's part-time cleaning job and Grace's pension. Logan contributed from his meager earnings, a fact that seemed to escape the conversation. Then came the question of our living arrangements. "Where will you live?" Grace inquired, her curiosity tinged with expectation. "We have a condo," I replied, admitting I'd bought it last year, never anticipating marriage. Lily's response veered towards surprise and a hint of envy. "You own a condo. Must be nice," she remarked, a subtle suggestion of newfound wealth. I hastened to clarify, emphasizing that I financed it myself and that the mortgage wasn't significantly different from renting. Grace's tone shifted, expressing reliance and a hint of expectation. "We'll be counting on you from now on," she stated, alluding to potential future assistance. The notion of sharing as a family left me unsettled, but I chose to defer the discomfort for another time. With gratitude and a promise to seek guidance, I excused myself, eager to leave the spotlight. Our aversion to being the center of attention led us to forego a grand wedding ceremony, opting instead for a simple paperwork filing, a decision influenced by my demanding job. I rarely wore rings, so opting for a modest one seemed sufficient. There was no grand proposal with an engagement ring, but I accepted that this was the reality of our situation. After tying the knot, we both remained diligent in our work. Taking charge of our finances, I started stashing away funds, gradually building a safety net for our future. However, after 6 months of marriage, I stumbled upon a concerning discovery. $2,000 had vanished from our account. The only plausible culprit was Logan. Confronting him that evening, I questioned the disappearance. "Did you know $2,000 was withdrawn from our bank account?" I demanded, urging him to contact the bank. Initially taken aback, Logan swiftly adopted a defensive stance, brushing off the issue as a mere loan to his mother. Infuriated by his nonchalant attitude, I pressed him further, emphasizing the importance of communication in financial matters. His dismissive response only fueled my frustration, with a sinking suspicion fueled by a previous encounter where his mother boasted of a casino win. I realized the money likely fueled her gambling habits. Up until then, our savings were pooled, but following this incident, I resolved to squirrel away extra funds separately. Despite this rift, I assumed Logan's demeanor would remain unchanged as long as family matters didn't surface. He was diligently employed after all. However, our first wedding anniversary prompted a desire to deviate from our usual frugality and indulge in a bit of extravagance. Excitement bubbled within me as I arrived home, eager to unveil a surprise trip to Logan. However, my anticipation was dampened by the presence of Lily, who had been making frequent appearances lately, a routine that was starting to wear on me. Returning home after a taxing day of work to find her there was becoming a source of stress. In hindsight, the timing couldn't have been worse for sharing the news of our planned getaway. Yet I couldn't contain my enthusiasm about the luxury hotel reservation I had painstakingly secured. Logan's eyes sparkled with delight at the mention of the trip, but it was Lily who reacted most fervently. "Is it that hotel from the TV ads?" she exclaimed incredulously. Her tone carried a hint of envy, which I met with a confident explanation. "Since we've never taken a trip alone, we decided to indulge this time," I asserted, recounting the nerve-wracking experience of securing the booking on the day slots opened. Lily's response dripped with resentment. "How unfair of you," she retorted, her words tinged with bitterness. "Just because you're a nurse doesn't mean you should hog all the travel opportunities." She appealed to a sense of familial obligation, urging us to relinquish the trip in an act of filial piety. However, I couldn't overlook her penchant for travel despite her claims of financial strain, nor her propensity for fare evasion, a behavior she boasted about shamelessly. Her thinly veiled attempts at manipulation left me resolute in my decision. "Absolutely not," I declared firmly, determined to stand my ground. "We've been saving for this trip, and Logan works tirelessly. We deserve this splurge." Lily's displeasure morphed into a pointed remark directed at Logan, casting aspersions on my character and our marriage. Despite the discord, I remained steadfast in my resolve. There was no way I would forfeit our long-awaited trip to appease Lily's sense of entitlement. I felt a surge of anger as Logan remained silent, his gaze fixed downward. His inability to defend me only fueled my frustration. As Lily departed, her muttered remark casting me as the villain, Logan's puzzled expression mirrored my own disappointment. The excitement surrounding our trip dissipated, replaced by an uncomfortable tension that lingered as we retired for the night in an awkward silence. Normally, a good night's sleep would ease my troubles, but the following day brought an unexpected turn of events. Logan's words struck me like a blow when he suggested going on the trip with his mother and sister instead, excluding me entirely. I was taken aback, vehemently opposed to the idea. I couldn't shake the suspicion that his sudden change of heart stemmed from the late-night texts flooding his phone, likely filled with manipulative words from his family. His accusation of my heartlessness only deepened the divide between us. Marriage, he argued, was about uniting families, not individual desires. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling of being unfairly targeted. Despite our attempts to reason with each other, the conversation devolved into a stalemate, leaving us at an impasse. The disappointment was palpable as what was meant to be a joyous occasion now soared into a source of conflict. Returning home the next day to a tense atmosphere, I found my mother-in-law and sister-in-law waiting for me. With a smug expression, my mother-in-law declared, "Welcome back. We've resolved the trip matter. It's settled. The trip will be for me, my daughter, and my son." Shocked into silence, I turned to Logan for an explanation, though deep down, I doubted any justification could appease my frustration. Logan's response only fueled my disbelief. "It's as my mom said," he explained. "I shared our recent issues with her, and she proposed this solution. I'm going, you're staying. That's final." Outraged by the lack of consideration, I finally lost my temper, demanding an explanation for their irrational decision. But Logan's reply was laced with venomous words, his anger boiling over. He belittled my profession and reduced me to a mere source of income, revealing a side of him I had never seen before. His psychological abuse cut deep, leaving me feeling foolish for the efforts I had invested in our relationship thus far. Witnessing the altercation, my sister-in-law interjected, urging us to make amends and join them on the trip. But the thought of acquiescing to their unreasonable demands was too much to bear. I couldn't tolerate Logan's dependency on his mother and sister any longer. I've reached a point where I realize I don't need to hold on to affection for Logan or his family anymore. My once warm feelings have cooled to the point where it feels like I've been living in a dream. The idea of going on a trip with someone I've grown to dislike so intensely is unbearable. If his family holds such significance for him, then perhaps it's time to end our relationship. Let's proceed with the divorce, just as I suggested. It seems like the only logical solution to this impasse. Logan agrees, albeit with a hint of relief, suggesting we discuss it further after the trip. For now, he insists, the trip must take precedence. Feeling defeated, I reluctantly concede, allowing his family to have their way. When I inform Logan of my decision, he's quick to express his gratitude, assuring me he'll buy me a souvenir and even suggesting I might want some time alone to relax. His cheerful demeanor grates on me, but I've resolved to see this through. Taking matters into my own hands, I arranged for the hotel reservation to be changed to Logan's name and adjust it to accommodate a party of 3. On the day of their departure, I take the day off to see them off, observing their excitement with a mixture of resignation and amusement. Their overly packed suitcases for a one-night trip draw a chuckle from me as they set off. With them gone, I'm left with a newfound sense of purpose. Over the next 2 days, I embark on a life-changing task, relocating all of Logan's belongings to a rented storage unit. As a minimalist, I don't have much to pack up, but the process keeps me busy and focused on the fresh start that lies ahead. With the help of a friend from work, we swiftly complete the task in less than 2 hours. Now, there's no reason for Logan to return. This condo, purchased in my name when I was single, will remain a sanctuary from him. The locksmith I've arranged arrives promptly, ensuring that Logan is permanently barred from entering the premises. Additionally, I've sought legal advice from a lawyer named Mason regarding the divorce proceedings. Armed with audio evidence of the psychological abuse I endured, Mason assures me of a guaranteed victory and offers to represent me. Relieved to have someone else handle the divorce talks, I focus on tying up loose ends. Meanwhile, Logan and his family are under the mistaken impression that the hotel stay is prepaid, unaware that I had only made reservations. As a gesture for our anniversary, I had even arranged for a fancy cake and champagne, intending to surprise him. However, all expenses were to be settled at checkout. As anticipated, my phone buzzes incessantly around checkout time, but I ignore the calls with a sense of satisfaction. I can only imagine their shock when confronted with the hefty bill at the hotel. True to my expectations, I end up in police custody, unable to pay. Washing my hands of the situation, I send the divorce papers and the key to the storage unit containing Logan's belongings to his family home. With Logan and his family out of the picture, my condo returns to its peaceful state. I had prepared for the inevitable contestation of the divorce, with Mason handling everything on my behalf. Despite their financial struggles, Logan's family manages to scrape together enough money to secure their release. However, upon their return, their aggression leads to police intervention. Given the ongoing divorce mediation due to Logan's psychological abuse, he is slapped with a restraining order. Unable to afford a legal battle, his family quickly agrees to the divorce, bringing closure to the tumultuous chapter of my life. In the divorce proceedings, I assert my right to compensation for the psychological abuse endured during our marriage. Surprisingly, becoming single again proves to be less daunting than anticipated. Meanwhile, it appears that Logan's family continues to rely on his income, likely exacerbated by his gambling habits that he couldn't seem to shake. Logan's own employment instability becomes evident as he struggles to hold down a job, often calling in sick or even quitting impulsively. Despite my concerns about his behavior, he dismisses them, citing mental health issues. However, his inability to maintain steady employment leads to financial strain for his family. His sister's unemployment adds to their financial woes, and their refusal of welfare assistance only compounds their debt. To make matters worse, I've noticed suspicious characters lurking around their home, adding a sense of unease to their already turbulent situation. In contrast, my life post-divorce is remarkably stress-free. Flourishing in my career, I've even been promoted to supervisor, a role that I relish despite its challenges. With only myself to care for, I find I can cut corners on household chores, allowing me more time to focus on my own well-being. Though I hadn't planned on dating for a while, I found companionship with Caleb, a doctor who had been a supportive confidant before my marriage. Unlike my ex-husband, Caleb is both financially and emotionally stable. Still, I approach the idea of marriage cautiously now, mindful of the lessons learned from my past. Reflecting on my journey, I can't help but feel a sense of gratitude for the unexpected turn of events. In hindsight, I'm thankful that they took that ill-fated trip, unwittingly freeing me from a toxic situation.
Let me introduce myself. I'm Jenna, an assistant manager at a bustling marketing firm. For years, my life revolved solely around deadlines and presentations, until Mark came along. We met at a corporate event. He was the keynote speaker, talking about innovative architectural designs. He was confident, something that drew me in immediately, but what really caught me was his unassuming smile when he talked about his projects. A year after that meeting, I was not just attending another conference, but also planning a wedding. Mark proposed unexpectedly during a quiet dinner at home, a stark contrast to the public persona I first met. We married in a small ceremony, and I moved into the house he shared with his mother, Susan. Susan was a small woman with sharp features and an even sharper tongue. She greeted me on moving day, sizing me up with a critical eye as I lugged my boxes inside. "Make sure those boxes don't scuff the floors," she instructed, her voice stern. "Of course, Susan. I'll be careful," I responded, trying to keep my tone light. I learned quickly that Susan had rules for everything, from where to place my shoes to how the dishwasher should be loaded. It was her house, after all, and I was keen on making a good impression. Living with one's mother-in-law could be challenging, but I was determined to make it work. But it wasn't just the rules. There were the Sunday dinners when Susan would recount tales of raising Mark by herself, a monumental effort after her husband left following their daughter's death. She would look away sometimes, her voice dropping a notch. It was tough, raising a boy alone. But we managed, didn't we, Mark? Mark would nod, pass the potatoes, and quickly change the subject. I got the sense that these stories were Susan's way of reminding me of her sacrifices. One particularly chilly evening, as Mark was late from work again, Susan and I found ourselves alone. She was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of her famous beef stew, when I decided to join her, trying to break the ice. "Can I help with anything?" I offered. She glanced over her shoulder, then pointed at the salad. "Dress that. And don't drown it in vinegar like last time." Her words stung a bit, but I kept my smile. "I'll get it right this time." As I mixed the salad, Susan continued her monologue about the past. "Mark was always such a sensitive child. Needed more looking after than most boys. It's good you're here now. Maybe you'll manage better than I did," she said, her words a mix of hope and challenge. Settling into life with Susan and Mark proved to be a complex dance of personal boundaries and shared spaces. The early days were tough, with Susan watching every move I made around the house. But as time wore on, I started finding my rhythm, and oddly enough, it was the moments when Mark was away that brought Susan and I closer. One lazy Saturday afternoon, while Mark was out on one of his frequent business trips, Susan invited me to join her for coffee. The living room was cozy, a stark contrast to the cold formalness Susan usually exuded. "Sit down, Jenna. Coffee's almost ready," she called from the kitchen. "Thanks, Susan," I replied, taking a seat on the plush sofa, trying to make myself comfortable amid the embroidered cushions. Susan sat opposite me, her eyes studying me over the rim of her cup. "Mark tells me you're handling the new project at work," she said, her tone more curious than intrusive. "Yeah, it's a big one. Lots of late nights ahead," I responded, appreciating that she was making an effort to talk about something other than household chores. Susan nodded, then her expression shifted as she seemed to decide on something. "Jenna, I know we've had our, let's say, adjustments. But I want you to know, I'm glad he chose you." Her words took me by surprise. "Thank you, Susan. That means a lot." We sipped our coffee in a more comfortable silence than before, the air between us lighter. "Did Mark ever tell you about his sister?" Susan suddenly asked, setting her mug down. "No, not really," I admitted, curious about the family history Mark rarely mentioned. Susan leaned back, her gaze distant. "It was a hard time, losing her. Changed everything for us." "I can only imagine," I said softly, sensing the pain behind her words. Susan shook her head slightly. You never get over something like that. But you learn to live, I suppose. That's why I've been hard on you. I needed to know if you could handle this family, with all its scars. Her honesty was unexpected but welcome. I'm here to stay, Susan. I want to make this work, for all of us. She nodded, a ghost of a smile flickering across her face. I'm counting on it. Mark's father, he never got over it. Susan continued, looking into her coffee as though it held the past. He blamed me for our little girl's death. Said I should have been more careful, should have done something differently. But there was nothing I could have done, nothing to foresee. It tore us apart, and he left not long after. From then on, our relationship took on a new dimension. It wasn't perfect overnight, but there was a mutual respect forming. Evenings often found us in the kitchen together, where Susan would reluctantly pass me the salad bowl without a critical remark, where I would handle the delicate china with care without being reminded. Life at Susan's place settled into a routine, one that was comfortable in its predictability. I still put long hours at work, but now there was more to come home to. One particular evening, I discovered something that would change our lives forever. I was pregnant. The realization hit me like a freight train. I was going to be a mom. Excited and nervous, I bought a couple of those test kits, just to be sure. Each one confirmed what I already knew: our family was about to get bigger. I planned how to break the news to Mark, imagining a perfect, joyous moment. That night, when he came home from work, I had dinner ready, his favorite, spaghetti and meatballs. The table was set, the candles lit. I could barely contain my excitement. Hey, babe, something smells good, Mark said, loosening his tie as he walked in. Sit down, I've got news, I said, my voice trembling a bit with nerves. Mark raised an eyebrow, a smile playing on his lips. Good news, I hope? I nodded, handing him a small box I'd wrapped. Inside was the positive pregnancy test. We're going to have a baby, I blurted out before he could open it. Mark's smile faltered. He paused, looking at the test, then back at me. Wow, are we ready for this? His reaction wasn't what I'd hoped for. I think we are. I mean, I know we hadn't planned this now, but I'm happy, Mark, aren't you? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. It's not that I'm not happy, Jen. It's just, babies are a big deal, and they need a lot, and we can do this, I cut in, trying to keep my voice steady. I'll still work, we'll manage. We always do. Mark nodded slowly, still not quite meeting my eyes. Yeah, of course. We'll manage. It's just a lot to take in, you know? Dinner went on, the candles burning lower, the initial excitement I felt dampening under the weight of Mark's hesitant acceptance. It was clear we had a lot to talk about, a lot to figure out. The next day, after a night of little sleep and much thought, Mark handed me a list over breakfast. It was detailed, outlining everything he thought needed to be addressed before and after the baby arrived. I looked over the list. Separate bedrooms after the baby's born, schedules for nighttime feedings, budget adjustments. And all this should have been done only by me. Mark, this feels like it's just my baby, not ours, I said, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. Mark didn't respond immediately, his jaw tightening. Well, of the two of us, you want this baby the most, so it's fair. That day, I didn't just confront the reality of becoming a mother, but also the complexities of how it would impact my relationship with Mark. It was clear that while this baby was a part of us, the path forward wouldn't be without its challenges. As my pregnancy progressed, the atmosphere at home took on a subtle shift. I'd expected joy, or at least a growing sense of shared anticipation, but instead, there was an undertone of tension, particularly from Susan. It felt like every time I caught her eye, there was a flicker of something, discomfort, maybe even disapproval. One crisp evening, as the leaves started turning golden, I decided to address the elephant in the room. Susan was in the kitchen, meticulously peeling apples for a pie. The silence between us had grown too loud to ignore. Can we talk? I asked, leaning against the kitchen counter, trying to keep my voice light. Susan glanced up, her hands pausing for a moment. About how things are with us, since the baby news, I said. Susan put down the peeler, wiped her hands, and sighed. Jenna, it's nothing personal. I'm used to how things are around here. I nodded, understanding her more than she realized. I get that, Susan. But things are going to change. It doesn't mean it has to be bad. Susan resumed her peeling, a bit more forcefully. Changes aren't always for the better. As the weeks went on, Susan seemed to adjust to the idea of the baby. When my belly had obviously grown large, one afternoon she commented, "I'll be around to help with the baby. It'll be good having a little one in the house again." "That's great to hear, Susan," I said, a bit relieved, but then added, "You know, it's a girl." The change in Susan's face was immediate and stark. "A girl," she repeated, her voice flat. "Yeah, a girl," I confirmed, feeling a sudden chill. Susan looked away, her voice cold. "I don't like girls." The air felt heavier, denser. "Well, she's still your granddaughter," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Susan didn't respond, just continued with her cooking, and I knew that whatever semblance of peace we'd found was on shaky ground. As we moved through the weeks, Mark's demeanor also shifted. His work became busier, or so he said, leaving me alone most evenings and weekends. His absences were a stark contrast to the early days of our marriage, filled with long conversations and shared meals. Now, I was lucky if we spent a few hours together on Sundays. As my due date approached, I found myself often alone, wondering how our small, soon-to-be family could feel so disjointed. One afternoon, I found myself sitting in the nursery we'd prepared, running my hands over the soft blankets, the tiny clothes. This room, filled with all the things a baby could need, felt like the only place that was ready for her arrival. The day Ava was born was the most transformative day of my life. After hours of labor, when I finally held her in my arms, all the pain melted away. It was just me and her, and the world seemed to pause. Bringing Ava home was supposed to be the start of a beautiful new chapter. But the reality was far from what I had envisioned. Mark was at the hospital for the birth, but his presence felt more obligatory than supportive. He held Ava briefly, then handed her back like he was afraid he might break her. "Mark, isn't she beautiful?" I said, looking up at him with our daughter in my arms. "Yeah, she's great," he replied, but his eyes were scanning emails on his phone. I tried to brush off his detachment, focusing instead on Ava and the new motherly duties that filled my days and nights. As the weeks passed, Mark's absences grew longer. He was either buried in work or out with friends. "I need some air, Jen. You've got everything covered here," he'd say, kissing my forehead before disappearing for hours. It was during one of his absences that Susan's true colors regarding Ava started to show. Initially, when we brought Ava home, Susan had seemed to soften slightly, watching me feed her or change her with something that almost looked like curiosity. But that changed one day when Ava wouldn't stop crying. I was rocking her, walking up and down the living room, utterly exhausted. Susan walked in, her expression sour. "Can't you make her stop? All this noise is giving me a headache," she snapped. I was too tired to argue. "I'm trying, Susan. She's just a baby, she doesn't understand." "Well, you need to do something. Maybe take her out for a walk or something. Get her out of the house," Susan suggested, but her tone was far from helpful. As the weeks turned into months, the situation at home grew tense. Ava's colic didn't improve, and with Mark hardly around and Susan's constant remarks, I felt more alone than ever. One particularly tough evening, when Ava had been fussing nonstop and Mark was out again, I reached my breaking point. I called Mark, the sound of Ava's cries echoing in the background as I spoke. "Mark, I need you to come home. Please, I can't do this alone tonight," I pleaded. There was a pause before he responded. "Jen, you know I have a lot on my plate right now. You're doing great with Ava. She'll tire herself out soon." I hung up, feeling a mix of frustration and helplessness. When he finally came home late that night, he found me asleep on the couch, Ava finally quiet in my arms. "Look, Jen, I'm trying here. But you wanted this, remember?" His words cut deep. I looked up at him, too tired to cry. Yes, I wanted Ava. But I wanted us to be a family, Mark. I can't be the only one trying. Mark didn't say anything, just walked off to our bedroom, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a sleeping baby. That morning, my home office was a disaster zone, papers everywhere, and my laptop screen filled with endless data. The deadline for my report was looming large, and stress was my constant companion. Ava, only a few months old, was unusually cranky, adding to the chaos. In desperation, I turned to Mark. "Can you watch Ava for a few hours? I really need to focus." Mark, looking as if he'd rather be anywhere else but here, pulled out a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket and pointed at it. "Remember this? We agreed you'd handle Ava during the day." "I've got my own work, Jenna." I stared at him, feeling a surge of frustration. "It's just for a few hours, Mark. Can't you help out just this once?" He shook his head, unmoved, and turned back to his computer. Just then, Susan walked into the room, her expression unreadable. "I'll watch her," she said abruptly. I was taken aback, given her usual reluctance to involve herself with Ava. "Are you sure, Susan?" "Yes, go on. Get your work done." Grateful despite my reservations, I grabbed my things and headed to the office. The quiet there was a stark contrast to the tension at home. I buried myself in work, my mind only half on the financial analyses and forecasts. Hours later, drained from the mental exertion, I returned home. The house was silent. Too silent. In the living room, I found Susan watching TV, seemingly at ease. "Where's Ava?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "She's been sleeping quietly in her crib," Susan replied without turning to look at me. Surprised and relieved, I tiptoed to the nursery. There she was, Ava, looking peaceful in a way that she hadn't for days. It was a relief, but a part of me stirred with unease. She usually never slept this long without waking. I went back to my home office to catch up on more work, but as the night wore on, a nagging worry grew. Ava hadn't woken for her feeding, hadn't made a sound. Something wasn't right. Rushing back to the nursery, I reached for Ava, gently shaking her shoulder. "Ava, sweetie, wake up," I whispered. No response. Panic clawed at me. I scooped her up, feeling her too still, too quiet. "Ava!" I cried louder, hoping for any sign of awakening. Nothing. Mark heard the commotion and appeared at the door, annoyance etched on his face. "What's the problem?" "She's sleeping, isn't that what you wanted?" "She's not waking up, Mark. Something's wrong." My voice was sharp with fear. Susan came in behind him, her face set in a frown. "Stop being dramatic, Jenna. You're just overreacting." I held Ava closer, and that's when I smelled it, a faint but distinct odor of alcohol. "She smells like alcohol." "Why does she smell like alcohol?" I gasped, my heart racing. "You're imagining things," Susan snapped, her voice harsh. "Just lay her down and go rest." But I couldn't. I couldn't just lay her down. I dialed 911, my hands trembling as I explained the situation. Every second felt like an eternity, waiting for the ambulance, clutching Ava, praying for her to stir. The moment the ambulance arrived, everything became a blur. The paramedics rushed into our home, and even Mark and Susan finally emerged from their rooms, their expressions unreadable. They silently watched as the paramedics worked on Ava, checking her vital signs and quickly assessing her condition. The urgency in their movements was terrifying. One of the paramedics called out as he lifted Ava carefully. "We need to move fast. She's unresponsive." As they wheeled her out on the stretcher, I followed, barely aware of my own feet moving. At the hospital, doctors swarmed around Ava, their voices a mix of calm and urgency. I stood there, frozen, until one of them approached me holding a feeding bottle. "Is this what you've been feeding her?" the doctor asked, his tone serious. I took the bottle, my hands shaking. It was half full of a clear liquid. "No, this isn't milk. What is this?" My voice cracked as the realization hit me. The doctor's face was grim. "It's alcohol. It was in her crib. She's in critical condition because of it." Hearing those words, my legs gave out, and the room spun. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in a hospital bed, a nurse hovering over me. "Where's Ava? How's my daughter?" I asked immediately, trying to sit up. "Take it easy," the nurse gently pushed me back down. "Your daughter is stable now. We've managed to clear the alcohol from her system. She's doing much better." As the nurse stepped out, a couple of social workers came in. Their expressions were somber as they introduced themselves. "We've been informed about the situation," one of them started. "It appears your mother-in-law was responsible for giving your daughter alcohol. She told us it was to help her sleep and not be a disturbance." I felt sick. The reality of Susan's actions was horrifying. She did this, on purpose? Yes, she admitted to diluting cognac and giving it to Ava. "We've already contacted the police. They're handling it from here," the other social worker added. As they spoke, memories flooded back, the story Susan had told about her past, her daughter's tragic death. It hit me then, a chilling thought. Could this be how her own daughter died? "She always said her husband blamed her for their daughter's death," I muttered, half to myself. The social workers exchanged a look. "We'll make sure to mention this to the police. It could be relevant to their investigation." After they left, I lay back, exhausted and overwhelmed. My mind raced with what needed to be done next. It wasn't just about recovering from this nightmare, it was about protecting Ava from ever experiencing anything like this again. When Mark came to visit, his face pale, he looked like he was about to speak, but I cut him off. "How could you not see what was happening? She was under the same roof as us, Mark." I didn't know," he stammered, looking away. "I'm sorry. I should have been there more. I should have seen." "Sorry isn't enough, Mark, I want to get a divorce," I said firmly, my resolve hardening. It was about taking action, making sure our daughter never had to suffer like this again. After everything that happened, going back to the house I once shared with Mark was out of the question. Ava and I moved in with my parents for a while as I sorted things out. During that time, I filed for divorce. It was a tough decision, but necessary for our well-being. The court proceedings were draining. In the end, Susan was sentenced to a short term in prison. They could not prove Susan's guilt in her daughter's death, and had to pay a hefty financial compensation. Mark was ordered to pay child support. It wasn't about the money, though, it was about ensuring Ava's future was secure. A few months later, I bought an apartment. It was small, but it was ours, a sanctuary for Ava and me. We decorated it with bright colors and filled it with laughter and new memories. It was during this time of rebuilding our lives that I received an unexpected visitor. Mark's father, Greg, came by one afternoon. I hadn't seen much of him over the years, but he was always kind and had a gentle manner. His visit was a surprise, and honestly, a bit unsettling at first. "Jenna, I hope it's alright that I stopped by," he started, his hat in his hands, a nervous habit. "Of course, Greg. It's good to see you," I said, leading him into the living room. "Would you like some coffee?" As I brewed the coffee, Greg's purpose for visiting became clear. He wasn't just here to exchange pleasantries. "Jenna, there's something important I need to tell you," he said, his voice heavy with seriousness. "Susan, she did the same thing to her that she did to Ava. I've always suspected it, but I couldn't prove anything." His confession stunned me. The patterns of the past mirroring the present were chilling. Greg's next words were unexpected. "I've decided to bequeath my estate to Ava. She deserves a secure future, one that's not overshadowed by the mistakes of her grandmother." I was taken aback by his generosity. Greg, that's incredibly kind of you. Ava is lucky to have you. As Ava toddled into the room a few moments later, Greg's face lit up with a joy that was pure and heartfelt. Watching them together, I felt a sense of peace. Despite the turmoil, here was a bond that remained unbroken, a connection that could bring healing. With Greg's support and the new life Ava and I were building, the future looked brighter. I continued to work from home, balancing my career with being a full-time mom. Each day was filled with small achievements and large milestones, and I cherished them all. My name's Erica. Grew up poor, which meant you either got tough or got left behind. My family wasn't much, just me, Ma, and Pa. We scraped by in a cramped house, the walls thin as paper. Early on, Ma put a needle in my hand, saying, "Stitch your own path, girl." And so I did. School was just the place I waited till I could get back to sewing. Teachers talked about math and history, but my mind was on fabrics and patterns. By 15, I was mending jeans and jackets for folks in the neighborhood. Life took a real turn when I met Tom. He was the cousin of my best bud, Sarah. I remember that day clear as crystal. We were at Sarah's family barbecue, and he was there, flipping burgers and laughing loud enough to scare the birds. "Hey, Erica." Sarah waved me over, a big grin on her face. "Come meet my cousin, Tom. He's been dying to meet the girl who fixed his favorite jacket." Tom wiped his hands on his apron and reached out. "That was you? Hell, you saved my life with that fix." I laughed, brushing a loose strand of hair from my face. "It was just a few stitches." "A few stitches," she says. Tom chuckled, giving me a look like I just pulled a rabbit out of a hat. "You're too modest, Erica." We hit it off straight away. He was easygoing, the kind of guy who'd give you the shirt off his back and make a joke while doing it. The more we talked, the more I liked him. He was genuine, a rare thing in this world. Tom was a truck driver, always on the road. Said it was lonely sometimes, watching the world through a windshield with no one to share the view. "It's just me and the long haul, but I'd love someone to come back to," he admitted one evening, the sunset making shadows dance on his face. Tom was the kind of man who never said no, especially to his family. He'd often joke about it, saying how his big sister Linda got everything she ever wanted from him. "She's got me wrapped around her finger, but don't you worry, Erica. I've got plenty of yes left for you." I'd roll my eyes and jab back, "Better save the best ones for me, Tom." He'd laugh and pull me close, and in those moments, I knew we were right for each other. He was kind and a pushover for sure, but me? I was the punchy one, and together, we balanced out just right. Love hit fast, and we married just as quickly. It felt right, like stepping into a story that was meant just for us. Life with Tom was never dull, even when the road took him away more often than I liked. He was out there driving his truck, traversing from one city to another, while I kept the home fires burning and the sewing machine humming. You could say I had become quite the thrifty one over the years. Every penny from my sewing gigs went straight into a jar, and before we knew it, there was $20,000 saved up. It wasn't just pocket change, it was our ticket to something bigger. One evening, Tom rolled in, tired but happy to be home. I was stitching up a storm in the corner of our living room turned makeshift studio. The hum of the machine paused as I made my pitch. "Tom, what if we stop just making ends meet and start planning to get ahead? I've been saving up. We've got enough to put down on a new truck." Tom, who was halfway through a sandwich, stopped and looked up. "You serious, Erica? That's a lot of dough. You've been stashing away that much?" "Yeah, and it's just sitting there. Imagine if you could run your own gigs, choose your routes. We could pay off the lease with the extra jobs you take." He set his sandwich down, wiping his hands on his jeans, his brain ticking over. Could work. I'm sick of hauling for pennies for the other guy. Running my own show could mean real money. So, we did it. We found a decent truck, not the newest model, but reliable enough to handle the long hauls Tom was planning. The day we went to look at it, Tom was like a kid in a candy store, checking every part, talking shop with the dealer, so I barely kept up. "Erica, she's solid, good mileage, engine's in top shape. We take care of her, she'll take care of us," he said, his eyes not leaving the truck. I nodded, trusting his judgment. "Let's do it then. Let's buy our future." And we did. Papers signed, handshakes exchanged, and the keys were in his hand. Tom got his license sorted out for the new routes we'd scoped out, and soon he was taking orders for intercity trips. Money was tight at first, every cent counted even more than before. But Tom was pulling in enough jobs to keep us on track with the lease payments. Meanwhile, I didn't sit idle. My sewing had turned from a side hustle into a serious business. Enough so, that 3 years down the line, I opened my own small studio. It wasn't much, just a little space I rented out on the main street. The start was rocky, clients trickling in slow. But I kept at it, word of mouth started doing its thing, and my little studio began to see regulars. It was another 2 years of hustle, but finally, things smoothed out. The studio was bringing in a stable income, and we made the last payment on the truck. All that money we used to pour into the lease? Now it was ours to keep. One night, over a quiet dinner, Tom and I decided it was time for the next big step. "We've been doing good, Tom. Really good. Maybe it's time we thought about getting a place of our own. A real house, not this cramped apartment." Tom, who'd been quietly listening, nodded. "I've been thinking the same. We've worked hard, Erica. We deserve it." So, we started house hunting, and before long, we found a small townhouse. It was perfect for us, just enough space, a little yard, and a room that I could turn into a proper studio. We moved in, and it felt like a fresh start. Everything we'd worked for was finally coming together. After we settled into our new townhouse, Tom and I decided it was high time we took a break. We packed up and headed out to visit his mom, who lived a few cities over. Since Tom's dad passed, his mom had been living with his sister, Linda, and her 2 kids. Tom's mom was a sweet lady, always had been good to me. But Linda, well, that's another story. She and I never really saw eye to eye. Something about the way I came up, made my own way, she didn't like it, always hinting that I was just lucky. We pulled up to their house, a cozy little place with toys scattered across the front yard. Tom's mom greeted us with hugs and homemade cookies, her warmth a comforting blanket. But Linda, she just nodded, her smile tight, eyes scanning us like we were pages in a book she didn't want to read. Dinner was tense from the get-go. Linda cooked, which I made sure to compliment, but you could cut the tension with a knife. As we sat down, the small talk fluttered around, never landing anywhere substantial until Linda, stirring her drink, turned to me. "So, Erica, how's that little sewing business of yours? Making good money?" Her tone was casual, but her eyes were sharp, prodding. I paused, fork in midair. "It's a studio, Linda, and it's doing well, thanks." "And Tom's trucking? I bet that's bringing in plenty, huh?" She was leaning in now, her voice a mix of curiosity and something darker. I set my fork down, my appetite waning. "Linda, I don't think it's very polite to dig into people's finances at the dinner table." I tried to change the subject, asked about her kids, her life. But Linda was like a dog with a bone, wouldn't let it go. The evening spiraled from there, her questions peppering the air until I couldn't take another bite. "I think I'm full," I said abruptly, pushing my chair back. "Thanks for dinner." I could feel Tom's eyes on me, the weight of an apology in his gaze. I headed to the living room, the echo of their whispers trailing me. Later, when Tom found me looking out the window, the room was dark, save for the streetlights casting shadows. He came up behind me, his voice low. "Sorry about Linda. She's always been a bit much." I turned to face him, his features drawn in the dim light. "Why do you let her talk to you, or to us, like that?" He shrugged, a helpless gesture that didn't sit right with me. "I guess I'm used to giving in to her. Keeps the peace, you know?" But at what cost? I pressed, my voice firm. She walks all over you because she knows she can. And now me? Tom ran a hand through his hair, the lines of his face deepening. I know. It's just complicated. She's been having a hard time since Dad passed, and Mom relies on me to not stir things up. I sighed, stepping closer. I get it, Tom, but it's not right. You can't let her push us around, make us uncomfortable in our own family. Where does it end? The next dinner was just as stressful. I tried to make conversation about benign things, hoping to keep the evening light, but Linda had other plans. She wasted no time, diving straight into dangerous waters. You know, since you two have done so well for yourselves, she started, her voice dripping with a mix of envy and accusation. I think it's only fair that you think about the rest of us who haven't been so lucky. Tom shifted uncomfortably in his seat, looking anywhere but at his sister. I clenched my fork a little tighter, feeling the calm before the storm. Linda continued, undeterred by our silence. In fact, I think it's only right if you two give up your claim on Mom's property. After all, you don't need it. I do. I was stunned. Discussing inheritance in front of Tom's mother, who was very much alive and sitting right there, was beyond inappropriate. It was disrespectful. Linda, I can't believe you're bringing this up now, I said, my voice low and steady. It's Mom's decision, not ours or yours. But Linda plowed ahead, her voice rising. Oh, come on, Erica. You don't need the money. You don't need the house. I'm here with 2 kids, trying to make ends meet. It should be mine. I need it more than you do. Tom looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. He hated confrontation, especially with his sister, but even he looked like he might speak up this time. Before he could, however, his mom intervened. That's enough, Linda, she said, her voice firm, leaving no room for argument. I've already discussed this with my lawyer. The house will go to you and the children, and the money I've saved will go to Tom. That's final. Linda's face turned a shade of red I hadn't seen before. But the house is old. And Erica doesn't need the money, they make plenty. Tom's mom fixed a stern gaze on her daughter. The house being old doesn't change my decision, and it's not your place to comment on Erica's finances. What you need to do is stop counting on others and maybe get a job to support your children. Silence fell like a heavy curtain. Linda, mouth snapped shut and cheeks burning, didn't utter another word. Dinner ended quietly, and the rest of the evening passed with minimal interaction. The remainder of the week, I spent a lot of time with Tom's mom. The day we were leaving, she pulled me aside, handing me a small, ornate box. This has been in the family for years, she said, her eyes locking onto mine. It's filled with coins from different countries. I've added to it over the years. I want you to have it, to remember me by. I was touched, unsure what to say. Thank you, I will cherish it. Study them when I'm gone, she added, a hint of mystery in her tone. There's more to them than meets the eye. We hugged, a long, tight embrace that said everything words couldn't. It had been a month since our last, somewhat strained, visit to see Tom's mom. Life had slipped back into its normal rhythm, Tom returning from a long haul on the road and me buried in fabric and threads at my studio, rushing to meet an urgent order. That ordinary afternoon shattered with a single phone call. Tom answered his phone, his face draining of color as he listened. Linda? His voice was tight, worried. After a pause, his shoulders slumped. Oh, no. Okay, I'll be there. He hung up, looking lost. What happened? I asked, my heart sinking at his expression. It's Mom. She passed away, Tom managed, his voice barely a whisper. I felt a chill run down my spine. I'm so sorry, Tom. When's the funeral? Tomorrow, he replied, the word heavy between us. Tomorrow? That's so soon. Why didn't Linda tell us sooner? I frowned, concern lacing my tone. Tom shook his head, just as confused and frustrated. Before he could respond, I snatched the phone from the table and dialed Linda back, my pulse racing with a mix of anger and dread. "Linda, why are we only hearing about this now? And why so rushed?" I demanded as soon as she picked up. "Erica, this really isn't your concern. I've been too upset, and we're trying to respect Mom's wishes," Linda snapped, her voice cold. "And what wishes are those?" I pushed, needing to understand her hurried decisions. "Mom said only blood relatives should attend the funeral. That's why we're keeping it small. Just family, not you," Linda explained, a bit too quickly. Tom, overhearing the conversation, gently interjected, "If that's what Mom wanted, then we should respect her wishes. I'll go alone." Linda's response was almost too quick. "Yes, that's best. I'll see you soon, Tom." After hanging up, the silence in our home was stifling. I helped Tom pack, folding his clothes quietly, my mind racing with doubts about Linda's intentions. Despite my misgivings, I booked Tom's train ticket online, each click a reminder of the distance this situation was putting between us. He hugged me, tight and long, then stepped out into the fading light of day. I watched as he drove off, feeling a mix of sorrow for his loss and irritation at Linda's vague explanations and hurried arrangements. The quiet in the house was heavy, the kind that weighs on you, makes every little noise seem louder. I couldn't shake the sinking feeling in my gut. Why hadn't his mom wanted me at the funeral? We had a good thing, a genuine respect for each other. It didn't add up. Dragging my feet back inside, I noticed the small, ornate box on the mantel, one that Tom's mom had entrusted to me during our last, happier visit. I sat down, the box in my lap, my fingers tracing the intricate patterns carved into the wood before I finally opened it. Inside, nestled among various old coins from around the world, was a folded piece of paper, clearly her handwriting visible even before I pulled it out. Unfolding the note, I read her words, each one a mix of warmth and warning. "My dear Erica, thank you for the laughter and strength you brought into our family. Please, make sure you are with Tom at my funeral. I know Linda well, she will try to sway him to give up his rightful share, playing on his kind nature. I trust you to stand by him, as he may not have the heart to stand up to her alone." I read it twice, then a third time, each word sinking in deeper. Linda had lied. She'd played us all, hoping to manipulate Tom in my absence. Rage bubbled up inside me, not just for the deception, but for the sheer audacity of her plan. I grabbed my phone and dialed Tom's number, pacing the room as it rang. "Erica? What's up?" "I'm still at the station," Tom answered, his voice tired. "You need to wait for me, please. Don't get on that train. I'm on my way." I didn't wait for his response. I ended the call, grabbed my bag, and headed out the door. My mind was racing as I hailed a taxi to the station. Traffic seemed to conspire against me, every red light a barrier to my urgency, but I made it just in time. Walking into Tom's late mother's house felt like stepping onto a stage where a drama was already in progress. The moment Linda saw both of us, her face twisted in a mix of surprise and anger. She almost sputtered. "What are you doing here, Erica? Nobody called you." I met her glare steadily. "I came to say goodbye to your mother," I said simply. Linda huffed, turning away to hide the fury in her eyes. The funeral was a modest affair. I stayed at the back during the ceremony, saying my silent goodbyes to a woman who had shown me nothing but kindness. Afterward, everyone returned to the house. The mood was somber as we gathered in the living room, waiting for the notary to arrive and read the will. Linda paced nervously, casting glances at me that could freeze boiling water. When the notary finally cleared his throat and opened his briefcase, everyone settled down. "As per the last will and testament of Marjorie Ellen Davis," he began, his voice formal and echoing slightly in the hushed room. Linda's eyes were locked on the papers as the notary read through the legal jargon to the heart of the matter. "To Linda, I bequeath the family home and all contained within. To Thomas, I bequeath the sum of $400,000. The reaction was immediate. Linda's face crumpled into tears, her sobs theatrically loud. "But how can I live in that house? It's falling apart. I have no job, how will I provide for my children? Tom, ever the soft heart, looked at his sister with something akin to guilt. His eyes met mine, filled with a turmoil that said he was torn by his sister's pleas. The notary, unfazed by the display, asked if there were any questions. Linda, through her tears, begged Tom directly. Please, Tom, think of my kids. They're your nieces. We need that money more than you. Tom opened his mouth, likely to offer some kind of compromise, that was his nature. But I couldn't stand it anymore. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor. The room fell silent, all eyes on me. Linda's sobs hiccuped into a shocked silence. Enough, Linda, I said, my voice steady and clear. Everyone in the room turned to look at me, surprised by the force in my voice. I know what you've been trying to do, and it's going to stop, right now. I pulled out the note, unfolding it with shaking hands, but a firm resolve. I read it aloud for everyone, my voice echoing in the suddenly quiet room. Please make sure you are with Tom at my funeral. I know Linda well, she will try to sway him to give up his rightful share, playing on his kind nature. Linda's face went from sad to furious in a heartbeat. When I finished, she looked around, seemingly gauging if anyone would come to her defense. When no one did, she finally spoke, her voice venomous. I deserve that money more than he does, she spat, standing up to face us all. I have kids to care for, a house that's falling apart. Why shouldn't I have it? It was Tom's turn to stand. Because it's not what Mom wanted, Linda, he shouted, louder than I'd ever heard him before. You've always used me, always expected me to just roll over and do what you say, because you're my sister. Well, not anymore. Linda recoiled as if he'd struck her, her face a mask of disbelief. She stared at him, her mouth open, tears stopping as if cut off by a switch. I'm taking the inheritance Mom left me, and I'm putting it where it can do some good, Tom continued, his voice firm and resolute. The shock on Linda's face gave way to real tears, tears of defeat, not manipulation. She sobbed, covering her face with her hands, her act finally crumbling under the weight of Tom's declaration. We didn't stay much longer after that. Tom took my hand, and we walked out together, leaving Linda to her reality. As we drove home, the car was filled with a tense silence. Finally, Tom spoke, his voice quiet but strong. I'm sorry for all this, Erica. For letting it go on this long. After securing the inheritance, we made some big moves. We split the $400,000, investing it smartly into both our futures. It felt good, right, even, to put that money to use in ways that would honor the memory of Tom's mom. First off, we bolstered the atelier. I hired a couple of skilled assistants and expanded our workspace. It was amazing to see my dream of a bustling studio come to life, filled with creativity and the steady hum of sewing machines. Looks like you're building an empire here, Tom joked one afternoon as he watched us lay out fabric for a big order. Tom, on his side, didn't waste any time either. He used his share to buy 2 more trucks, expanding his fleet. Gotta keep up with you, Erica. Can't have you outdoing me in ambition, he'd said with a wink. Hiring drivers came next, and soon, he had his own small but thriving transport company. It was a proud moment for us both, signing off on those trucks, knowing they were entirely ours, no loans, no debts hanging over us. Speaking of debts, we finally paid off the mortgage on our townhouse. Passing that last check across the bank manager's desk felt like lifting a weight off our shoulders. All ours now, Tom had murmured as we walked back to the car, his arm snug around my shoulders. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm after that. Our businesses were doing well, which meant we could take a bit more time to enjoy the little things. Long walks in the evening, weekend getaways when we could squeeze them in, and plenty of quiet nights at home, just enjoying each other's company. But it wasn't just business thriving in our lives. Recently, we got some news that added a whole new layer of excitement. Turns out, I'm pregnant. The day I found out, I couldn't wait for Tom to get home. I paced around the kitchen, the positive test clutched in my hand, waiting to drop the bombshell. When he finally walked in, I blurted it out before he could even take his coat off. "Tom, we're going to have a baby." He froze, then broke into the biggest grin I've ever seen. "Really? We're going to be parents?" His voice was a mix of disbelief and joy. "Yeah, we are," I said, laughing as he swept me up into his arms, spinning me around in pure happiness. As for Linda, well, we haven't had much contact with her. Last we heard, she'd had to find a job to support herself and the kids. It's tough, but maybe it's for the best. Learning to stand on her own might do her some good, I figure. It's funny how life works out. There were times when I thought we'd never see the end of the turmoil. Now, here we are, our lives full and expanding like my belly, new beginnings that feel just right. We've got plans, big ones, for our family and our businesses. And whatever comes, I know we'll handle it, together. Because that's what we do best. I'm Maria. My family is full of linguists, and languages were a big part of my life growing up. My mom and dad were both professors, always talking about the nuances of different languages at the dinner table. I guess it rubbed off on me because by the time I finished college, I could speak 5 languages fluently: English, Spanish, French, German, and Italian. I met David when I was still in college. He was in my circle of friends, and we clicked right away. David is tall, with dark hair and a kind smile that always made me feel at ease. He came from a wealthy family, which always seemed to be a point of stress for him. His parents, Mr. and Mrs. Anderson, were very clear about wanting him to join the family business as a financier, but David had other plans. David and I used to hang out a lot, sharing our dreams and frustrations. He would often vent about his parents' pressure. "Maria, I just can't see myself crunching numbers all day," he'd say, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "I want to work with animals, help them. That's what makes me happy." David secretly started volunteering at a local vet clinic, learning everything he could about animal care. He was so passionate about it, and I admired that about him. He was determined to make his dream come true, even if it meant going against his parents' wishes. "Maria, you should have seen this little puppy today. It was so scared, but once I calmed it down, it was all wagging tails and happy barks," he'd say, his face lighting up with joy. "That's amazing, David. You're doing something really special," I'd respond, genuinely happy for him. We were just friends, but I always felt a deep connection with David. We understood each other in a way that was rare. I loved languages, and he loved animals, but we both shared a passion for following our dreams. As graduation approached, David's parents intensified their pressure, and he became more conflicted. But through it all, we supported each other. We'd often meet up to vent and encourage one another. "You've got this, David," I'd say, giving him a reassuring smile. "You're going to be an amazing vet someday. And you, Maria, are going to be the best translator out there," he'd reply with a grin. It was a typical Friday night, and our group of friends decided to have a little get-together. We gathered at John's place, a cozy apartment that was perfect for our small party. There was a good amount of wine, some snacks, and lots of laughter. David and I were there, as usual, sharing stories and enjoying each other's company. "Maria, you've got to try this wine," David said, handing me a glass. "It's from a vineyard in France, supposed to be really good." "All right, but only if you promise not to let me get too tipsy," I replied with a grin, taking the glass from him. We talked for hours, our conversation flowing effortlessly. It felt different that night, more intimate, like we were seeing each other in a new light. As the party started to wind down, we found ourselves sitting on the couch, a little apart from the rest of the group. "Maria, do you ever think about what it would be like if we were more than friends?" David asked suddenly, his voice soft but serious. I was taken aback by his question, my heart pounding in my chest. I've thought about it, David," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Before I knew it, we were leaning in, and then our lips met in a gentle kiss. It was electric, like something out of a movie. We pulled back, staring at each other in shock and wonder. "Wow," David said, his voice shaky. "I didn't expect that." "Me neither," I replied, feeling a blush creep up my cheeks. "But I'm not complaining." We sat there for a moment, the air between us charged with a new kind of tension. It was like the room around us faded away, leaving just the two of us in our own little world. "Do you want to get out of here?" David asked, his eyes never leaving mine. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. We quietly slipped out of the apartment, hand in hand, and made our way to his place. The walk there was filled with nervous laughter and stolen glances, both of us trying to process what had just happened. We went inside, and the next few hours were a blur of kisses, laughter, and whispered confessions. It was like we were finally allowing ourselves to feel what we had been holding back for so long. Everything felt right, like we were exactly where we were supposed to be. The next morning, I woke up in David's arms, feeling a mix of happiness and nervousness. I gently nudged him awake, needing to talk about what had happened. "David, wake up," I whispered, shaking his shoulder gently. He stirred, opening his eyes, and giving me a sleepy smile. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Morning," I replied, feeling my cheeks heat up. "We need to talk about last night." After that romantic night, David and I decided we didn't want to wait any longer. We wanted to get married. We were so sure of our love, but we knew his parents might be a hurdle. When we told them, Mr. and Mrs. Anderson weren't thrilled. They had known me for years as David's friend, but as his wife? That was a different story. They didn't like that I wasn't from a wealthy family. Still, they agreed to our wedding but insisted on a prenuptial agreement. They wanted to make sure I wouldn't claim any of David's money. "You'll need to sign this prenup, Maria," Mr. Anderson said, handing me the documents. "It's just to protect the family assets." I glanced at David, who nodded reassuringly. "I understand," I said, taking the papers. Despite the cold reception, they allowed us to live in David's late grandmother's apartment. It was a beautiful place in the city center, with windows overlooking the square. The apartment was elite and expensive, with excellent repairs and new furniture. It felt like a fresh start. After the wedding, we moved in, but Mr. Anderson made it clear that one room, filled with his mother's belongings, was off limits. "Those items are priceless to me, Maria," he said sternly, handing me the key. "You are not to enter that room." I nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. "I won't, Mr. Anderson. I promise." With that, David and I began our new life together, ready to face whatever challenges came our way. Living with David was like a dream at first. We were so happy in our new place, but soon enough, that bliss got a serious jolt thanks to his sister, Laura. Laura started dropping by unannounced, making herself right at home. One Saturday morning, just as I was getting ready to enjoy a peaceful breakfast, she showed up. "Hey Maria," Laura said, strolling into the kitchen without even knocking. "What's for breakfast?" I forced a smile, trying to keep my annoyance in check. "Good morning, Laura. I was just about to make some eggs." "Make enough for me too, will you?" she said, plopping down at the table and scrolling through her phone like she owned the place. I took a deep breath and started cooking, reminding myself to stay calm. David walked in, looking a bit surprised to see his sister. "Laura, didn't know you were coming over," he said, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah, thought I'd surprise you guys," she said with a smirk. "This place is amazing. I could get used to hanging out here more often." As days went by, Laura's visits became more frequent and more invasive. She'd stay over without asking, and every morning it was the same thing. She'd demand breakfast, criticize my cooking, and make snide comments about me living in her grandmother's apartment. "Maria, you should really learn how to cook better," she said one morning, pushing her plate away. "You're living here on borrowed time, you know." That was the last straw. I clenched my fists and looked her straight in the eye. "Laura, you can't just come here and disrespect me in my own home." She scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Your home? This is my family's apartment, Maria. You're just here because my parents are too nice to kick you out. David had enough. He walked over and stood next to me, glaring at Laura. Laura, you need to show Maria some respect. She's my wife, and this is her home too. Laura's face twisted in anger. Of course you'd take her side. Mom and Dad always loved you more, gave you everything, and now you're letting her take what's left. Enough, Laura. David's voice was firm. If you can't respect Maria, then don't come here anymore. Laura stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I let out a sigh of relief, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. David hugged me, whispering, "We'll get through this, I promise." The next day, my phone rang, and it was my mother-in-law. She didn't even bother with pleasantries. "Maria, I've heard terrible things about how you're keeping the apartment," she snapped. "Laura says it's a mess, and you're not being a good hostess." I was stunned. "Mrs. Anderson, that's not true. I've been doing my best to keep the place clean and welcoming." "Clearly, your best isn't good enough," she retorted. "We're very disappointed with David's choice to marry you. We think you should consider leaving." When I told David about the conversation, he was furious. "They have no right to talk to you like that, Maria. We'll figure something out." Days turned into weeks, and the tension with David's family kept building. Laura continued her visits, though less frequent after David's outburst. She still managed to make every interaction a challenge. As the days passed, I focused on keeping our home a sanctuary, a place where David and I could escape from the outside world and his family's constant scrutiny. We knew we had to stick together and stay strong, no matter what challenges came our way. David worked for his father's company, but I was having a hard time finding a job as a translator. I went for interviews, but the jobs offered were way below my skills and pay expectations. One evening, I was home alone, feeling a bit down about another unsuccessful interview. I was just about to get comfortable when I heard the door unlock. I wasn't expecting anyone, so my heart jumped into my throat. In walked David's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Anderson, without so much as a knock. They just strolled in, acting like they owned the place, which technically, they did. "What are you doing here?" I asked, trying to hide my annoyance and shock. "You could have at least called." Mrs. Anderson looked around, her face twisted in disdain. "We don't need to call before coming into our own apartment." "What if I was naked?" I shot back. "You can't just barge in like this." Mr. Anderson ignored me, looking around with a critical eye. "We've decided to install surveillance cameras to make sure you're keeping it in order." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Cameras? You're kidding, right? This is our home, not a prison." Just then, David came home, looking tired but quickly realizing something was wrong. "What's going on?" he asked, glancing between me and his parents. "We're installing cameras," his father declared. "To keep an eye on how things are being maintained here." David's face turned red with anger. "This is ridiculous. You can't do that." "Yes, we can," Mr. Anderson snapped. "You owe everything to us. You should be grateful and keep quiet." Mrs. Anderson turned to me, her eyes cold. "You're a gold digger, Maria. You don't even have a job. You're just living off my son's money." That was the final straw. I looked straight at David and said, "I can't do this anymore. I want a divorce. I'm leaving." David's eyes widened in shock, but then he nodded. "If you leave, I'm going with you," he said, his voice steady. Mr. Anderson's face turned even redder. "If you walk out, you're cut off. No inheritance, no support." Mrs. Anderson added, "We'll move Laura in here for better control." That's when I had an idea. I winked at David and whispered, "Trust me, play along." David gave a slight nod. "All right, we'll get a divorce," he said, turning to his parents. They looked pleased with themselves. "Good," Mr. Anderson said. "We'll install the cameras and give Maria a month to find another place." Mrs. Anderson smirked. You're doing the right thing, David. We'll have Laura move in next week. After David's parents left, he turned to me with a confused look. Maria, why did you agree to a divorce and ask me to play along? He asked, his eyes full of worry. I gave him a reassuring smile. Just trust me, David. Do what I ask, and it'll all make sense soon. He sighed but nodded. All right, I trust you. We hugged, and I could feel the tension in his shoulders ease a bit. A week later, David had to go on a business trip to Hong Kong for his father's company. As soon as David flew out, Laura and her boyfriend Rick showed up, just as his parents had promised. Hey, Maria, Laura said with a smirk, walking in without knocking. We're moving in to keep an eye on the place. You know, since you'll be leaving soon. I forced a smile. Welcome, Laura, Rick. Just one thing, don't go into the locked room or touch anything there, okay? Laura's eyes lit up with curiosity. Why not? What's in there? Just family stuff, I said, trying to sound casual. She made a sly face and nodded. Sure, we won't touch it. For the next week, I tried to get along with them, but it was tough. They treated the place like a party house, spending David's father's money and having a blast. Every night was the same, drinking, loud music, and their constant attempts to put me down. Laura spent a lot of time near the locked room, smoking and clearly itching to get inside. She tried to act casual, but I could see the curiosity eating at her. Every time she made a move toward the door, I was there, making sure she couldn't sneak in. A week later, I decided it was time to put my plan into action. I walked into the living room where Laura and Rick were lounging. Hey, I'm going to visit a friend for a few days, I said, grabbing my coat. I'll come back later for my things. Laura's eyes sparkled with glee. Really? That's great. Have fun. I nodded, keeping my face neutral. Thanks. Just remember, don't go into the locked room. Yeah, we got it, Laura said, practically shooing me out the door. I left the apartment and checked into a nearby hotel, finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. I knew Laura's curiosity would get the better of her, and she'd try to get into that room the moment I was gone. Settling into my hotel room, I felt a strange mix of anxiety and satisfaction. I knew the next few days would be critical, but I was ready for whatever came next. David trusted me, and I was determined to see this through, no matter what. The morning after I left the apartment, I got a video call from Laura. I answered it, not sure what to expect, but ready for anything. Laura's face popped up on the screen, looking way too pleased with herself. She was standing in the middle of the now empty locked room, grinning like a cat that caught the canary. Hey Maria, guess what? She said, her voice dripping with smugness. I broke the lock and threw all your crap out. Oh, and I changed the locks on the front door. Good luck getting back in now. I couldn't help it, I burst out laughing. Laura's smug expression faltered, confusion replacing her glee. What's so damn funny? She snapped. I wiped a tear from my eye, still chuckling. Laura, you clueless fool. I took all my stuff with me. That room wasn't mine. It was packed with your dad's things. He specifically told me not to touch any of it. Her face turned ghostly white. What? No, you're lying. Nope, I said, smirking. Those were your dad's precious belongings. He made it clear they were off limits. Laura's eyes widened in horror. She turned to Rick, who was lounging in the background. Rick, you moron. We've got to get those things back from the trash, now. Rick jumped up, looking panicked. What do you mean? We tossed everything last night. It's probably all gone by now. I watched the chaos unfold, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. Laura, maybe start thinking about what your dad will do when he finds out you trashed his stuff. Laura's face crumpled, and she began to cry, her shoulders shaking with sobs. This can't be happening. We're so screwed. I couldn't hide my satisfaction as I watched her meltdown. Well, Laura, maybe next time you'll listen to people when they warn you. With that, I ended the video call, feeling a wave of relief and triumph. Finally, karma had caught up with Laura, and it was a sight to see. I leaned back in my hotel chair, savoring the moment. It felt good to see her get a taste of her own medicine. After David got back from his business trip, he came straight to my hotel. We decided to head back to the apartment together, hoping to finally sort out the mess Laura had caused. As we arrived at the apartment, we were greeted by flashing lights and police officers. We walked up to find Laura, looking disheveled and panicked, talking to the police. Rick stood next to her, looking just as freaked out. Laura was waving her arms, trying to explain something. "It was a break-in," she was saying, her voice shaky. "All the valuable stuff from the locked room was stolen." Just then, Mr. Anderson pulled up, his face a mask of fury and concern. He stormed over to the police, demanding to know what was going on. "What's all this about a robbery?" he barked. One of the officers turned to him. "Sir, the young lady here claims the apartment was broken into and items were stolen from a locked room." Mr. Anderson's eyes narrowed. "We need to check the surveillance footage. There are cameras installed in the apartment." Laura and Rick turned pale at the mention of cameras. They exchanged panicked glances, clearly realizing the trap they had walked into. The officer nodded. "All right, let's take a look at that footage." We all went up to the apartment, and Mr. Anderson quickly accessed the camera system. As the footage played, it showed Laura and Rick breaking into the locked room and throwing out all the items. A heavy silence fell over the room as everyone watched the damning evidence. Laura's face was a picture of horror, and Rick looked like he was about to faint. Mr. Anderson's face turned a dangerous shade of red. "Laura, what the hell have you done?" he roared. Laura started to cry, her voice shaking. "Dad, I'm sorry. I thought these were Maria's things. We didn't know what else to do. You lied to the police. You tried to stage a robbery to cover up your stupidity." Mr. Anderson exploded. "I can't believe this." The police officer cleared his throat, looking stern. "Ma'am, you've made a false report. That's a serious offense." Mr. Anderson shook his head, his voice trembling with rage. "Because of your actions and this deceit, I renounce you, Laura. You're disinherited. You are no longer my daughter." Laura collapsed to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. "Dad, no. Please don't do this." The officer nodded to his partner, and they started filling out a report. "We'll need to take you both in for questioning about this false report." Rick's face went white. David squeezed my hand, his face a mix of anger and relief. "I can't believe she tried to pull this off." As the police escorted Laura and Rick out of the apartment, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It had been a long, hard road, but we had finally come out on the other side, stronger and more united than ever. David's father did exactly what he said he would. He cut Laura off completely. No more money, no future inheritance. Her boyfriend ditched her too, seeing as he was only in it for the cash. Now Laura's stuck in a tiny, run-down apartment, scraping by on her own. It's a tough break, but she had it coming. Meanwhile, David and I decided it was best to cut ties with his controlling parents, at least for a while. David quit his father's company and finally opened his own veterinary clinic, something he's always dreamed of. I'm so proud of him. And as for me, I landed a great job as a translator for a big international company. We're both working hard, but it's worth it for the freedom we have now. We're still in a rented apartment, but it feels like home because it's ours. No more constant surveillance or judgmental eyes watching our every move. We're making plans for the future, like buying our own house and starting a family. It's exciting to think about what's ahead. One morning, over breakfast, David and I were talking about our plans. "Maria, have you thought about where you'd like to buy a house?" he asked, sipping his coffee. I nodded. "Yeah, somewhere quiet, but not too far from the city." "What about you?" "I'm thinking the same," he said, grinning. A place with a big yard for the dogs. I laughed. Of course, you'd want space for the dogs. That's fine by me. And what about kids? Are we still thinking a couple of years down the line? David looked thoughtful. Yeah, I think that's a good plan. Let's get settled first, make sure the clinic is running smoothly, and then we can start thinking about kids. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Sounds perfect. We've got time, and we're building a good life together. Later that day, we visited his new clinic. It was a cozy place, already bustling with clients and their pets. I watched David in his element, caring for animals and talking to their owners. He looked so happy and fulfilled. One weekend, we decided to visit some open houses, just to get a feel for what was out there. We found a few places we liked, and it was exciting to imagine our future home. Maria, can you picture it? David asked as we stood in the backyard of a charming house. Kids playing here, maybe a dog running around? I smiled, feeling a warm glow inside. Yeah, I can. It feels right, doesn't it? Absolutely, he said, putting an arm around me. We're building something real, something lasting. As we left the house, I felt a sense of contentment and anticipation. We were on the right path, and the future looked bright. My name's Ellie, and if you were to look at my life now, you might not guess where I started. Born to a family that had more love than money, I learned early to stand on my own 2 feet. College was a dream too expensive to entertain, so straight out of high school, I was ringing up groceries at a local store. I turned 25, still punching that same clock, dreaming of something, anything, that might break the monotony. That's when Jack waltzed into my life. It was at a casual bash thrown by mutual friends. He had that easy smile and a way about him that just, I don't know, made you want to be around him. Hey, I'm Jack. And who might you be? He said, leaning against the kitchen counter with a beer in hand, eyes never leaving mine. Ellie, I replied, trying not to show how his gaze made my heart race a bit. Just Ellie. Just Ellie, huh? Sounds like there's a story there waiting to be told. His charm was something else. He wasn't like the guys I knew, who mostly just grunted their way through conversations. Jack actually talked, laughed, and listened. We hit it off that night, talking about everything and nothing until the party dwindled and we were left under the dim porch light, reluctant to say goodbye. You know, Ellie, I haven't had this much fun talking to someone in a long time. Can I see you again? He asked, his tone hopeful. I nodded, feeling that flutter of excitement you get when something good begins. Yeah, I'd like that. And see each other we did. Dates turned into a steady thing, and our steady thing turned into love, or at least, I thought it was love. 2 years later, Jack proposed at that same friend's backyard, under a sky lit up with stars. It was simple, no grand gestures, just him and me, and a ring that he was shaking to put on my finger. You're it for me, Ellie. Marry me? Of course, I said yes. I thought this was it, my happily ever after. The wedding was a modest affair, but filled with laughter and dancing. Our little apartment became the cozy nook of the world where we planned a future and built a life. Or tried to, anyway. Life doesn't always give you what you want, but sometimes it throws you exactly what you need. That's what I kept telling myself when I found out I was pregnant. It wasn't planned, but then, what good things in life are? I remember the morning I found out. The bathroom was steamy from my shower, and there I was, staring at a little stick that was about to tell me my future. Positive. My heart did somersaults. Excitement, fear, joy, panic, all of it mixing up inside me like a storm. Breaking the news to Jack wasn't easy. I knew money was tight, and babies? They don't just need love, they need diapers, clothes, and 1,000 other things we hadn't saved up for. But this felt right, if only to me. I waited for Jack to come home that evening. He was late, again. The clock ticked too loud as I rehearsed what to say. When he finally walked through the door, his face was tired, his shoulders slumped like he'd carried the world on them. Jack, we need to talk, I started, my voice shaky. What's up? He asked, barely looking up as he dropped his keys on the table. I took a deep breath. I'm pregnant. Jack froze, his eyes finally meeting mine. There was a silence, heavy and thick, before he finally spoke. Pregnant? Ellie, how did this happen? I almost laughed. Almost. Well, you know how it happens, Jack. I was careful, we were careful, but sometimes life has other plans. He ran a hand through his hair, looking around the room as if he'd find some answer or escape scribbled on the walls. We can't afford a baby right now, Ellie. We just can't. Things are tight as is. I felt a sting at his words, but I pushed on. I know money's tight, but we can make this work. People do with much less. And I want this baby, Jack, I want this more than anything. Jack shook his head, frustration lining his face. It's not just about money, Ellie. It's about us. Are we even ready to be parents? I looked at him, really looked at him, trying to find the man I married in those troubled blue eyes. I am. I'm ready. I can do more, work more. We can figure this out. Please, Jack, say you're with me on this. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked over to the fridge, opened it, and stared inside like he'd find some wisdom next to the leftover takeout. Finally, he shut it, leaned back against the counter, and sighed. Ellie, I'm not saying no because I don't love you or the idea of a family with you. But think about our lives, how we struggle with just the two of us. Bringing a kid into this mess doesn't seem fair. I felt tears prick at my eyes, but I blinked them back. Life's never fair, Jack. But it's ours to make better. I'm having this baby, with or without your blessing. I'd rather it be with, though. Jack looked at me then, really looked at me, as if seeing me for the first time. You're really set on this? Yeah, I am. The birth of our son Danny should have been the happiest moment of our lives, but for Jack and me, it was the start of the hardest times. Jack's absence grew more noticeable every day. He was either at work or just not there mentally when he was home. I remember one evening, a few months after Danny was born, I was rocking him back to sleep after a late-night fuss. Jack walked into the nursery, his face shadowed and tired. Ellie, we need to talk, he said, barely above a whisper. I looked up, holding Danny a bit closer. What's up? My voice was tired, worn out from nights of little sleep and days filled with too much alone. It's about this, he gestured vaguely around the room, his face strained. It's about us, about me. I can't do this. It's too much. I felt a chill run down my spine. What do you mean, you can't do this? Talk to me, Jack. What's going on? Jack paced a few steps, then stopped, facing away from me. I'm just overwhelmed. I'm always at work, and when I come home, there's just so much noise, so much need. I thought I could handle it, Ellie, but I can't. I'm not cut out for this father stuff. His words stung, but they weren't a surprise. I'd seen it, the distance, the disconnect. So what are you saying? You want out? You want to leave your son? No, not leave, he struggled to find the right words. I just need space, Ellie. I need to breathe. That's when I decided I needed more than just to wait around for Jack to come home. I started studying to become a nail technician. The local community college offered night classes, and my mom agreed to watch Danny. I'd study after putting Danny to bed, practicing on plastic hands until my own fingers ached. Finally, I got my license and set up a little studio right in our home. Converting our rarely used dining room into a salon, I started taking clients during the day. It wasn't easy juggling a new business and a baby, but it gave me a sense of purpose, something that was just mine. The money I made was modest at first, but it grew as my reputation spread. I poured my heart into every set of nails I did, every client I talked to. It wasn't just about the money, it was about being Ellie again, not just Danny's mom or Jack's wife who needed to be handled with kid gloves. When Jack got promoted to head the meat purchase department at the cannery, it meant we had to move. It was a big step up for him, but for me, it felt like starting from scratch all over again. We found a small house to rent in the new city, and I set up my nail salon right at home, hoping to attract some local clients. The adjustment wasn't easy. I spent days walking around the neighborhood, handing out flyers and introducing myself. Slowly, clients started trickling in, drawn in by word of mouth and my promise of a neighborly touch in their beauty routines. But Jack wasn't happy. One evening, after I'd finished with a client, he burst out, "Can't you take that stuff somewhere else? The house is always dusty, smells of your chemicals. I can't even relax in my own home." I was wiping down my table, and I stopped, looking at him. "This is how I make our living too, Jack. My clients are important to me." "Yeah, well, it's annoying," he snapped before storming out, leaving me standing in a silent house that suddenly felt too small for the both of us. Despite the rough start, my salon began to pick up. I was making good money, enough to think about renting a space outside our home. But the thought of starting in a new location, with the risk of not attracting enough clients, weighed heavy on me. One day, I mentioned it to Jack, trying to gauge his thoughts. "I'm thinking about renting a space for the salon. It might be better for us, for the house." He just shrugged, his mind on other things. "Do what you want, Ellie. Just make sure it doesn't come back to bite us." His indifference stung, but it was nothing new. Jack's life was changing too. With his bigger salary, he started taking more care of himself, hitting the gym, buying fancy clothes, and attending social events. Events I was never invited to. One night, he was dressing up for another one of those parties, and I couldn't help myself. I had to ask, "Why don't you ever take me with you?" He looked at me through the mirror, a frown lining his forehead. "Ellie, look at us. You're not cut out for that crowd. They're educated, polished. I can't be explaining my wife who does nails." As he left, the silence of the house wrapped around me. His words echoed in my head, fueling a fire I didn't know I had. I was tired of being the invisible support behind his shiny new life. That fire pushed me to take the leap. I used almost all of my savings, $70,000, to open my own salon in a small but bright space downtown. It was a gamble, a huge one, but I was done being just a background in Jack's life. At first, I worked alone. Long days filled with appointments, my hands constantly in motion. The salon slowly gained a reputation for quality and care, and soon, I had enough clients to hire 2 more technicians. One morning, as I was opening up the salon, Jack came in. It was early, and he looked out of place in his business suit among the pastel colors and nail polish racks. "What are you doing here, Jack?" I asked, surprised to see him. "I heard you hired more people." "Sounds like you're getting serious about this," he said, looking around with a mix of curiosity and disdain. "Yes, I am serious. This salon is going to succeed, with or without your approval," I said firmly, meeting his gaze. Jack smirked, a cold, humorless curl of his lip. "Just be careful, Ellie. Don't come crying to me if it all falls apart." As he left, I turned back to my salon, pride swelling in my chest. This was my place, my dream being built. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, I felt ready for whatever challenges it might throw my way. That day started like any other in my salon. I was setting up for an afternoon of appointments, feeling good about where things were headed. Just as I was enjoying a rare quiet moment, the door chimed, and in walked Jack, my husband, with a woman I'd never seen before. She was polished, blonde, and carried herself with an air that filled the room. I thought maybe Jack had brought a new client, so I put on my best professional smile and went to greet them. "Hey Jack, who's this with you?" I said, keeping my tone light and friendly. Jack didn't return my smile. His face was all serious as he introduced her. "Ellie, this is Linda. She's going to be my wife." My heart skipped, stumbled, then plummeted. "You're what?" Linda looked at me, her gaze cold and dismissive. Yes, I'm the CEO at the cannery where Jack works. We're getting married. The room spun a little. Married? But Jack, what are you talking about? We're married. Jack's eyes were hard, not like the man I remembered marrying. Ellie, I'm going to be filing for divorce. Linda and I, we're better suited for each other. She's smart, educated, wealthy. His words felt like punches, each one knocking the wind out of me. Linda chimed in, her voice dripping disdain. It's rather unpleasant here, being surrounded by such simple pursuits. She looked around my salon with a sneer. No offense, but I can't stand being next to mere staff who only clean other people's nails. Before I could find the words, she turned sharply on her heel. You should know, you'll be evicted from your rented house soon. You and your son will have to live in shelters. They laughed together, a sound that seared itself into my memory, and then they left as quickly as they had come. I stood there, frozen, as the door closed behind them. The silence of the salon around me was suffocating. I couldn't stay there, I couldn't breathe. I canceled all my appointments for the day and headed home, the weight of their words crushing me with every step. When I got to the house, it was too quiet. I found a note from Jack on the kitchen counter. He had written that I could stay in the apartment for 2 more months, before I needed to find another place. No apologies, just cold instructions, as if our life together meant nothing. The realization that I was alone, truly alone in this strange city with my son, hit me hard. I slid down against the wall, the paper crumpling in my hand, tears finally breaking through. How had everything come undone so quickly? But as I sat there on the floor, something shifted inside me. Anger simmered up, burning away the initial shock and hurt. I was down, but I wasn't out. Not by a long shot. I had my son to think about, a business that needed me. I focused all my energy on the salon. I started by blasting social media with posts, offers, and before and after photos of my clients. I printed flyers and distributed them all around the neighborhood, offering deals for first-time visits. It didn't take long for the word to spread and for my booking calendar to fill up. We were booked solid for 3 weeks straight, and I had never been busier or more motivated. I moved us into a small apartment right above the salon. It wasn't much, but it was ours, and it was enough. From our windows, we could see the life of the street below, and I liked the closeness of it all, work just downstairs, home up here. It felt compact, manageable. The divorce dragged on, ugly and draining. Jack claimed Danny wasn't his to get out of paying child support. That forced us into a DNA test, which only proved what I already knew: Jack was the father. The court didn't take kindly to his antics and ordered him to pay up for child support. It was a small victory in the midst of a lot of pain. Despite the chaos, the salon became my refuge. I threw myself into my work, arriving early to open up and staying late to clean up, making sure every part of the business ran smoothly. My hands were constantly in motion, painting, filing, shaping. It wasn't just about nails, it was about rebuilding my life, one appointment at a time. One late evening, as I was finishing up with my last client, Maria, she caught me off guard with a question. Ellie, how do you do it? Stay so strong? I paused, looking at her through the mirror, a smile tugging at the corner of my lips, despite the tiredness. What choice do I have, Maria? Life doesn't stop for you, even when it feels like yours has stopped. My boy needs me, and I need to be strong for him. Every day was a battle, but every day also brought small victories. My client base grew, and the community's support was overwhelming. They came for the nails, but they stayed for the camaraderie, and my salon became a little sanctuary not just for me but for many of the women in the area. One afternoon, as I balanced my books, checking the numbers and planning for the future, I realized I was actually doing it, I was making it on my own. Financial independence was within reach, and it tasted sweeter because I knew every penny was earned through my own sweat and tears. The salon buzzed around me, filled with laughter and chatter, a stark contrast to the quiet of my legal battles and personal struggles. But it was this buzz that kept me going, that reminded me every day that no matter how tough things got, I had a community, a purpose, and a plan. As I locked up for the night, turning the sign to closed, I felt a sense of accomplishment wash over me. The street was quiet, the night settling in. I looked up at the apartment windows where Danny was probably asleep by now, and I felt a surge of determination. It was a regular Tuesday morning when the peace of my salon was disrupted by Laura, one of my regulars who lived in the high-rise across the street. She burst through the door, a look of distress etched across her face that I hadn't seen before. "Ellie, you won't believe what they're doing now," she gasped, clutching her purse tightly against her chest. "What's happened, Laura?" I asked, my hands pausing on the nail file I was holding. "It's the cannery, your ex's place. They've dumped a whole busload of illegal workers into our building, and now they're planning to set up temporary housing right in the park next door." Her voice was shaky, tinged with anger and worry. The news hit me like a truck. Not just because the park was where the neighborhood kids played, including my own son, but because of the sheer disregard for our community. My salon's clients, who were already seated and overhearing our conversation, began murmuring among themselves, their faces clouding over with concern. At that moment, something inside me clicked. I couldn't sit back and let my neighborhood be overrun and unsafe because of the cannery's irresponsible actions. I also saw a chance to right some wrongs Jack had helped bring about. "I'll tell you what we're going to do," I began, my voice growing firmer as I spoke to the room. "We're going to stand up to them. We're going to show them that they can't just push us around. We live here. Our kids play here. We matter." Heads nodded, and the room filled with a new energy, a collective resolve. "I'm going to organize a meeting here, tomorrow. We'll plan our next steps. Tell your neighbors, bring your friends. We're stronger together," I declared. Over the next few days, I turned my salon into a makeshift community center. We created signs, drafted petitions, and planned peaceful protests. I led the charge, fueled not just by my civic duty, but by a deep-seated desire to challenge Jack and the destructive path he was part of. Then, one afternoon as we were preparing signs for another rally, Jack showed up at the salon, Linda in tow. They both looked unusually meek, a stark contrast to their usual haughty demeanor. "Ellie, can we talk?" Jack asked, glancing around at the bustling salon-turned-activist hub. I stepped closer, crossing my arms. "Sure, Jack. What's so important?" He glanced at Linda, who hesitated before pulling out an envelope. "We want to make you an offer, Ellie. This should cover all your troubles. Just stop this protest, let the cannery do its business." I peeked into the envelope she handed me. It was filled with $100,000. My heart raced, but my resolve didn't waver. "You think you can buy me off? Buy off our safety and well-being?" I scoffed, pushing the envelope back into her hands. "You can keep your dirty money. I'm not stopping until you pull back your plans for the park and treat your workers right." Jack's face hardened. "You're making a big mistake, Ellie." "No, Jack," I shot back, a steely edge to my voice. "The only mistake was thinking you could come here and push us around. I suggest you take your offer, turn around, and get out of this city while you still can." Linda, her face a mask of disbelief, turned on her heel, with Jack trailing behind her. They knew they were defeated, at least for now. It all escalated when Jack and Linda, blinded by greed, began tearing down trees in our local park to build housing for illegal workers. I couldn't just stand by. I took to social media, aired the issue on local TV, and the uproar that followed was louder than anything our town had ever seen. The story caught fire, and soon, even the governor was knocking on our door, or rather, the cannery's door. The state sent inspectors and the immigration service, who found more wrongs than rights. The plant was slapped with fines so steep that Jack and Linda's empire crumbled under the weight of legal debts. They were forced to sell the factory, and the new owners turned it around, offering legitimate jobs with decent pay to city residents. As for me, the community started calling me a hero, though I never felt like one. I was just a woman who loved her neighborhood enough to fight for it. 2 years after the dust had settled, Jack showed up at my salon. He was a shadow of the man I once knew, tired, older, and worn down by his choices. "Ellie, can we talk?" His voice was low, hesitant. I nodded, leading him to a private corner. "What is it, Jack?" I'm sorry, Ellie. For everything. I was wrong, so wrong. Can you ever forgive me?" His eyes searched mine, looking for a hint of the softness he once knew. "Jack, I forgave you a long time ago, for my sake, not yours. But forgive and forget are two different things. What we had is over, and it's staying that way." He nodded, a resigned slump to his shoulders. "Can I see Danny? I want to try to be a part of his life again." I hesitated, thinking of our son who had grown so much in the absence of his father. "I'll talk to Danny about it. If he wants to see you, then I won't stop him. But it'll be his decision." Later, when I asked Danny, he shook his head, his decision firm. "I don't know him, Mom. I don't want to." Jack had made his bed, and now he had to lie in it, far away from us. In the meantime, the salon grew into a chain. I wasn't just fixing nails anymore, I was setting standards in the beauty industry. The profits were more than I ever dreamed, but what truly fulfilled me was planning to open a network of schools teaching manicure techniques. Danny, now in high school, had taken up art, his talent blooming under the care of his teachers and his proud mom. Watching him at his easel, brush in hand, creating worlds more colorful and kind than the one we'd fought so hard to mend, I knew I'd made the right decisions. My boy was going to be all right. We both were. I'm Anna, and I want to share my story. Maybe it'll help someone out there. So, here's how it all started. I met Alex through my cousin, David. David had this idea that Alex and I would be perfect for each other. Alex was charming and seemed genuinely nice. We hit it off, and after dating for a year, Alex proposed. I was thrilled and couldn't wait to start our life together. David was all smiles about it. "Anna, you and Alex are like a match made in heaven," he'd say whenever we met up. Our wedding was beautiful, surrounded by family and friends. Everything felt perfect. Right after the wedding, Alex suggested we move in with his mother, Ellen. He said it'd be good for us financially, and Ellen needed company after her husband passed away. I wasn't sure at first, but Alex was convincing. At first, living with Ellen was fine. She was nice enough, and we got along pretty well. I tried to help around the house and make things comfortable for everyone. 6 months later, Alex brought up the idea of me quitting my job. "Anna, I've been thinking. Maybe you should quit your job and focus on the house and helping my mom," Alex suggested one evening. "Quit my job? But I like my job, Alex," I replied, feeling a bit uneasy. "I know, but it would be better for all of us. Mom could use more help, and you'd have more time for the house," he insisted. So, I quit my job as an accountant. It was a tough decision because I enjoyed my work, but I thought it was the right thing to do for our family. I wanted to be a good wife and help Alex and Ellen as much as I could. In the beginning, it seemed okay. I kept busy with housework and spent a lot of time with Ellen. We cooked together, and I tried to learn more about her and Alex's family traditions. I missed my job, but I told myself it was worth it for the sake of our family. Alex seemed happy with the arrangement too. "See, Anna? This is working out well. We're all getting along better, and the house is running smoothly," Alex said, looking pleased. "Yeah, I guess it's not so bad," I agreed, trying to stay positive. As the months went by, I tried my best to keep things running smoothly at home. I focused on making Alex and Ellen happy, even though I sometimes missed my old life and the independence my job gave me. But then, little by little, things started to change. Ellen became more demanding, and Alex's attitude towards me shifted. It was like they both started seeing me differently, more like a housemaid than a wife or daughter-in-law. One morning, I was in the kitchen making breakfast. Ellen walked in and frowned at the sight of me. "Anna, did you forget to dust the living room? It's a mess in there," she said, her tone sharp. I did dust it, Ellen. I'll do it again after breakfast, I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. Well, it doesn't look like it. You need to be more thorough, she snapped back, not hiding her irritation. When Alex came home that evening, Ellen wasted no time in complaining about me. Alex, you need to talk to Anna. She's not keeping the house clean enough, Ellen said, her voice dripping with annoyance. Anna, what's going on? Why isn't the house clean? Alex asked, looking at me with a frown. I cleaned the house, Alex. I don't know what else to do, I said, feeling frustrated and helpless. Just do a better job. We can't have Mom upset like this, he replied, his tone dismissive. I felt like I was walking on eggshells all the time, trying to avoid Ellen's criticism and Alex's disappointment. No matter how hard I tried, it was never enough. One day, Ellen decided to have some friends over for lunch. She didn't give me much notice, and I scrambled to prepare everything. Anna, I need you to serve lunch to my friends. Make sure everything is perfect, Ellen ordered, not bothering to ask if I was okay with it. When her friends arrived, I served them lunch and tried to be as polite as possible. But I could feel their eyes on me, judging me. Is this your daughter-in-law, Ellen? She seems a bit flustered, one of her friends remarked, not bothering to lower her voice. Yes, she's still learning how to manage everything, Ellen replied, casting me a disapproving look. I wanted to disappear. After they left, Ellen wasted no time in complaining to Alex. Anna was so slow and disorganized today. Her cooking wasn't even that good, she said, shaking her head. Anna, what the hell happened? Mom said you messed up lunch, Alex demanded, his face red with anger. I did my best, Alex. I was just trying to keep up with everything, I replied, my voice shaking. Well, it wasn't good enough. You need to step it up, he shouted, making me feel like a failure. Things kept getting worse. Ellen's criticisms became more frequent, and Alex's temper grew shorter. I started to dread each day, wondering what I'd be criticized for next. One weekend, I tried to take a break and spend some time for myself. I wanted to read a book and just relax for a bit. Ellen found me sitting in the living room, book in hand. Anna, what are you doing? There's laundry that needs to be done, she said, glaring at me. I just wanted a little break, Ellen. I'll do the laundry right after, I replied, feeling my face flush. No breaks until all the work is done. Get to it, she snapped, her eyes cold. When Alex got home, Ellen didn't waste any time in telling him about my laziness. Anna, what the hell? You can't just sit around all day. There's work to do. Alex yelled, his voice booming. I wasn't sitting around all day, Alex. I just took a short break, I tried to explain, feeling my heart pound. No more breaks. Just do your damn job, he shouted, making me feel small and worthless. I started to feel like a prisoner in my own home. I was constantly on edge, waiting for the next criticism or outburst. I missed my job, my friends, and the sense of independence I used to have. 2 years after our wedding, I had a beautiful daughter, Lily. She became my world, my reason to keep going. I found so much comfort in her. I spent all my time caring for her, trying to shield her from the chaos around us. But things were getting worse with Alex. His temper was growing, and he was getting more aggressive. One evening, when Lily was 5, everything hit a new low. Alex came home angry about something, I don't even remember what. Anna, why the hell is this house such a mess? He shouted as he walked in. I cleaned it, Alex. I've been taking care of Lily all day too, I replied, feeling the familiar knot of fear in my stomach. Your cleaning isn't good enough. You're useless, he yelled, his face red with rage. Before I could say anything, he grabbed my arm and shoved me hard. I lost my balance and fell to the floor, hitting my side against the table. The pain was sharp, and I screamed. Mommy! Lily cried out, running towards me. Alex turned to her, his face still twisted with anger. Go to your room, Lily, he barked. Lily stood there, frozen, and then she started to stutter. Mommy, are you okay? I looked at her, my heart breaking. It's okay, baby. Mommy's okay, I said, trying to soothe her, but I could see the fear in her eyes. After that night, Lily's stuttering didn't go away. I took her to a psychologist, hoping to help her, but even after 2 years, there was little improvement. It killed me to see her like that, knowing it was because of what she'd seen. I knew Lily was watching everything, absorbing it all. She was learning from the way Alex treated me, and I was terrified she'd think this was normal, that this was how families were supposed to be. But I felt trapped. Alex had made it clear many times that everything, the house, the money, it was all his. He'd told me more than once that if I tried to leave or filed for divorce, he'd take Lily away from me. I couldn't risk losing her. She was my everything, the reason I got up every day and faced the hell my life had become. So, I stayed. I endured the shouting, the pushing, the constant fear. I kept quiet, thinking it was the only way to keep Lily safe with me. One day, I got a call from my cousin David. Anna, I have some bad news. Your mom passed away, he said gently. I felt my heart drop. I hadn't spoken to my mom in years, because Alex forbade it. I needed to go to her funeral, to say goodbye. I went to Alex, trying to stay calm. Alex, my mom passed away. I need to go to the funeral, I said, my voice trembling. He didn't even look up from his newspaper. No, you're not going anywhere. We don't have money for that, he said coldly. I felt the tears streaming down my face. I couldn't believe he was being this cruel. Alex, please. She was my mom. I have to go. I pleaded, my voice breaking. No. And that's final. You stay here and take care of the house and Lily, he said, turning back to his papers. I felt a surge of anger and sadness. I couldn't believe he was being so heartless. I knew I had to go, no matter what he said. I went to Lily's room and gently woke her up. Sweetie, we're going on a little trip. Be very quiet, okay? I whispered. Okay, Mommy, she said, her voice sleepy and confused. That night, after everyone was asleep, I packed a small bag for Lily and me. I took my savings and quietly slipped out of the house with Lily. We got in the car, and I started driving towards my hometown. My heart was pounding, but I knew I had to do this. We arrived early the next morning. I was exhausted but relieved to be away from Alex, even if just for a while. We checked into a small motel and got a little rest before the funeral. The farewell was split into 2 parts, one for family and one public. The family farewell was emotional. I hadn't seen my relatives in years, and there were a lot of tears and hugs. I felt a mix of sadness and relief being around them. During the service, my phone rang. It was Alex, of course. I accidentally hit the speaker button, and his angry voice echoed through the room. Anna, get your ass back home right now, or I swear to God, I'll file for divorce and take Lily away, he shouted. Everyone turned to look at me, their faces showing a mix of shock and pity. I felt my face burning with embarrassment. I quickly turned off the speaker and mumbled, I'm at my mom's funeral, Alex. We'll talk later. Then I hung up. For the rest of the service, I felt a knot of shame and anger in my stomach. I couldn't believe he'd humiliated me like that in front of everyone. But I also felt a strange sense of clarity. I knew I couldn't keep living like this. After the service, David came up to me. Anna, you can't go back to that. You deserve better, he said, handing me a piece of paper with a lawyer's number on it. Call this lawyer. He can help you. I looked at the paper, feeling a mix of fear and hope. Maybe this was my chance to change things. Thank you, David, I said, feeling tears in my eyes. We spent the night at the motel again. I didn't sleep much, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of hope. I was scared, but I knew I had to take this chance. For Lily and for myself, I had to find a way out. That morning at the hotel, after my mom's funeral, I woke up with a new resolve. I knew I couldn't keep living in fear and letting Alex control my life. My mom had left me her house and a good amount of money. It was a lifeline, a chance to start over. I looked at the phone number David gave me, the lawyer who could help with my situation. I knew I had to act, for Lily and for myself. Lily, being with me during the funeral, had almost stopped stuttering, and I wanted to keep that progress going. I took a deep breath and dialed the lawyer's number. "Hello, Mr. Thompson? This is Anna. I'd like to schedule a consultation," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Of course, Mrs. Anna. Can you come in this afternoon?" he replied. "Yes, I'll be there," I confirmed, feeling a mix of fear and determination. After dropping Lily off at David's place, I headed to the lawyer's office. I felt nervous but ready to take this step. Mr. Thompson was a kind man, and he welcomed me warmly. "Mrs. Anna, tell me everything," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. I told him about the years of control, the threats, and the violence. He listened carefully, taking notes. "We need solid evidence of the abuse, both physical and emotional," he explained. "Record everything. Keep a detailed journal." I nodded, feeling a plan forming. "I'll do that. I'll record every incident and write down everything," I promised. After the meeting, I went straight to buy a new smartphone. It felt like a small act of rebellion, a step towards taking back control. I set it up with a secure passcode and tested the recording function. I wanted to be ready for anything. Feeling more prepared, I returned to David's house to pick up Lily. She looked happier and more relaxed than I'd seen her in a long time. "Ready to go home, sweetie?" I asked, giving her a hug. "Yes, Mommy," she replied, smiling. We drove back to Alex and Ellen's house. I felt a mixture of dread and determination. I knew I was walking back into a hostile environment, but this time I was ready to fight back. As soon as I walked in, Ellen was there, glaring at me. "Where the hell have you been, Anna? Do you think you can just waltz in and out as you please?" she snapped. "I was at my mother's funeral, Ellen. I told Alex," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Well, you're back now. Get to work. This house won't clean itself," she said, turning away with a huff. I took a deep breath, turned on my new phone, and slipped it into my pocket. I started recording, determined to capture everything. I went about my chores, documenting every harsh word and insult. When Alex came home, he was furious. "Anna, what the hell were you thinking? Leaving like that without my permission?" he shouted. "I went to my mom's funeral, Alex. I had to go," I replied, my heart pounding. "You don't do anything without my say-so. Do you hear me?" he yelled, his face red with anger. "Give me your phone and purse." I handed him my old phone, glad of my foresight. I wasn't going to let him intimidate me anymore. I was gathering evidence, building my case, and planning my escape. That night, after everyone was asleep, I sat down with my journal. I wrote down everything that had happened since I got back, every insult, every threat. I felt a sense of purpose, a determination to see this through. The days that followed were tough. Alex and Ellen were as hostile as ever, but I kept recording and documenting. I was building my case, piece by piece, readying myself for the fight ahead. At dinner one night, Ellen started her usual tirade. She looked at me with disdain and said, "You're nothing but a walking girl, leaving the house without Alex's permission. Disgraceful." I felt a surge of anger. "Ellen, don't insult me in front of my daughter," I said, trying to keep my voice calm but firm. Alex's face turned red with anger. "How dare you raise your voice at my mother?" he yelled, pushing me hard. I stumbled but didn't fall. He then swung his hand towards me, eyes blazing with fury. "You live here on bird rights, Anna. Don't forget that," he shouted. I took a deep breath, feeling a strange calm wash over me. "I want a divorce, Alex," I said clearly. His face turned a deeper shade of red, and he screamed, "You belong to me. You'll be my property until death." I wasn't scared this time. I had my phone in my pocket, recording everything. I knew I had proof. For the first time, I felt a sense of control. Over the next week, I continued to record every insult and threat from both Alex and Ellen. Each time they belittled me, I quietly turned on my new phone's recorder. Ellen didn't hold back. "You're worthless, Anna. Can't even keep a house clean," she sneered. I noted it all down in my journal. Every insult, every harsh word, went into my records. I knew this was crucial for my case. Alex wasn't any better. "You think you're tough now? You'll never leave me. You're nothing without me," he'd shout. I stayed calm, recording his words and adding them to my growing list of evidence. It was exhausting, but I knew it was necessary. One day, I caught Ellen berating me in the kitchen. "You're a disgrace to this family, Anna. Leaving the house like a tramp," she spat. I recorded her words, feeling more determined than ever. I knew I was building a strong case, one that would protect Lily and me. That week was tough, but I felt a new sense of purpose. I was gathering the evidence I needed to break free. For Lily's sake and for mine, I was determined to see this through. A week after returning from my mom's funeral, I couldn't take the tension at home anymore. I called Mr. Thompson, the lawyer. "Mr. Thompson, it's Anna. I've collected all the evidence. It's getting unbearable here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Anna, your cousin hired a private investigator to look into your husband. The investigator has some important findings. Can you meet him today?" he replied. "Of course, I'll go right away," I said, feeling a mix of fear and anticipation. I drove to meet the private investigator, feeling nervous but determined. When I arrived, he was waiting with a serious expression. "Anna, I've been looking into your husband's activities. He's involved in fraudulent schemes and has ties to criminal activities. The police have been watching him, but they didn't have enough evidence until now," he explained, handing me a folder. "This folder has everything. It's your freedom folder," he said. I took the folder with trembling hands, feeling the weight of its importance. "Thank you. This means everything to me," I said, my voice shaking. I got back in the car and drove home, my mind racing with thoughts of what this meant for Lily and me. When I pulled into the parking lot, Alex was there, his face twisted with anger. "Where the hell have you been, Anna? Get in the house now," he shouted, his eyes full of menace. I felt a surge of fear, but knew I had to stay calm. I didn't get out of the car. Instead, I called David. "David, I'm at home, and Alex is furious. I have the evidence. Can you call the police?" I said, my voice trembling. "Stay in the car, Anna. I'll call them right now," David replied. Alex, seeing I wasn't moving, yanked the car door open and dragged me out. "You don't listen. You think you can defy me?" he screamed, pulling me towards the house. At that moment, the police arrived, lights flashing. I collapsed on the asphalt, overwhelmed by the tension, and burst into tears. The officers rushed over, separating Alex from me. They arrested Alex and took the folder with the evidence. I sat there, watching as they led him away, feeling a mix of relief and disbelief. After the police took Alex away, Ellen was furious. She stormed into the house, her face twisted with rage. "You ungrateful woman. We took you in, and this is how you repay us?" she spat, her voice full of venom. I didn't respond. I knew it was pointless. I packed our things quickly, gathering what little I could. Lily clung to my side, sensing the tension but staying quiet. With our bags packed, I took Lily's hand and walked out of that house, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. I rented a small apartment nearby, just enough for the two of us. It was modest, but felt like a palace compared to the nightmare we'd left behind. I focused on preparing for the trial. Mr. Thompson was a huge help, guiding me through the process. He assured me we had a strong case, with all the evidence we had collected. The day of the trial came, and I felt a mix of fear and hope. I walked into the courtroom, holding my head high, determined to fight for my future and Lily's. Mr. Thompson presented all the evidence, the recordings, the journal entries, and the documents from the private investigator. It was overwhelming to relive it all, but I knew it was necessary. When the judge finally spoke, I held my breath. Based on the evidence presented, I grant the divorce and full custody of the child to Mrs. Anna. The defendant is also ordered to provide financial compensation for moral and physical damages and pay alimony for life. Since Alex and Ellen didn't have the money to pay the compensation, they had to sell their house. Alex was also sentenced to 5 years in prison for his fraudulent activities and the abuse. Back at home, I told Lily the news in a way she could understand. "Are we safe now, Mommy?" she asked, her eyes wide with hope. "Yes, Lily. We're safe, and we're free to live our lives the way we want," I replied, feeling tears of joy streaming down my face. After the trial, I moved back to my hometown, to my mom's house. It felt like coming home after a long, dark journey. The house was filled with memories and a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. David, my cousin, helped me get a job at a local charity that supports women in difficult situations. It felt good to be helping others who were in similar situations, using my experience to make a difference. Lily adapted quickly to our new life. Without Alex and Ellen's toxic presence, she blossomed. Her stuttering disappeared, and she seemed happier, more confident. One afternoon, 5 years later, I got a call from an unknown number. I hesitated but answered it. "Anna, it's Alex. I want to see my daughter," he demanded, his voice harsh and demanding. I felt a surge of anger. "No, Alex. You lost that right. Don't bother us again," I said firmly, and hung up the phone. I looked at Lily, playing happily in the yard, and felt a deep sense of peace. We had come so far, and I was determined to protect our new life. Raising Lily, I focused on teaching her to be strong and independent, to always stand up for herself. I wanted her to grow up knowing her worth, never to be controlled or belittled by anyone. I always thought I had a normal life, a bit secluded, maybe, but normal. That's what you think when you grow up, surrounded by the same high walls, the same echoing halls. My name is Valentina Ricci, and I live in a large house near the outskirts of Naples. To anyone peering through our iron gates, it might look like a mansion from a fairy tale. But fairy tales don't tell you about the shadows. My father, Luca Ricci, is a businessman, or so he claims. I've overheard enough hushed phone calls and seen enough strange faces coming in and out of our home to guess that his business isn't the kind you learn about in school. He's a broad-shouldered man with a stern face that rarely smiles, except when he's making a deal or when his pals, who reek of smoke and secrets, pat him on the back and call him Padrino. My mother, Maria, is a beautiful woman, but you can see the sadness etched into her face if you look closely enough. She spends most of her days in the garden or in her painting room, where the smell of oils and turpentine mix with her sighs. One evening, I was coming down the stairs, the sound of my footsteps lost in the vastness of our hall, when I heard them, the sharp snaps of my father's voice. I paused, gripping the ornate railing, listening. "You can't back out now, we're too deep in this," he growled in Italian. His words were like ice. "You think you can just walk away? Think about your family." I wasn't supposed to hear that. I wasn't supposed to know these things. I rushed back to my room, my heart pounding, trying to convince myself that maybe he was just talking about a regular business deal. But deep down, I knew. Days went by, and the visitors became more frequent. My father would be away for days, coming back at odd hours, his suit smelling of smoke and something else, something metallic, like blood. It was during one of those days when he was away that I found my mother crying in the kitchen. She was sitting at the table, her head in her hands, a cup of untouched coffee in front of her. "Mama," I said softly, walking over to her. "What's wrong?" She looked up, wiping her eyes. "It's nothing, Valentina. Just adult problems, tesoro. I sat beside her, taking her hand. Is it about Papa? She sighed, her gaze drifting to the window where the curtains fluttered slightly with the breeze. Your father, he has a lot of responsibilities. Things that, well, you wouldn't understand. But why do you cry? I pushed, needing to understand her sadness. It's hard, Valentina, she replied, squeezing my hand. This life, your father's life, it's not simple. I worry about him, about us. But we could leave, right? If it's so bad, why don't we just go? Her laugh was bitter, nothing like the warm chuckles she shared on my birthdays. And go where? Your father's reach is far, and his colleagues, they don't let people just walk away. I wanted to argue, to scream that we could try, but the resignation in her eyes stopped me. It was then I realized that our gilded cage was locked from the outside, and my father held the key. Life took a turn, and the days blended into a silent monotony. My father decided that school wasn't safe for me anymore. Too many risks, he muttered one evening, not really talking to me, but more to himself. I didn't argue. Arguing with Luca Ricci was like yelling at a storm to stop raining. Useless and potentially dangerous. Instead of school, the dining room became my classroom, and a series of tutors came and went. They taught me languages, English, French, even some German. For your future, my father said, but he never explained further. Languages I could handle, but the good manners lessons felt like a joke. Sit up straight, Valentina. A lady never rests her elbows on the table, Valentina. Smile, but not too widely, speak, but not too loudly. One day, I couldn't take another moment of the etiquette tutor's nagging. Why does it matter? I snapped, slamming my book shut. Who am I trying to impress in here? She looked taken aback, her eyes wide and her mouth pinched tight. Your father insists. I don't care what he insists on. I shouted, then immediately regretted my outburst. She was just doing her job, after all. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house felt smaller, tighter. I slipped out of my bed and wandered down to the kitchen for a glass of water. The light was on, and my mother was there, sitting at the table again, looking lost in thought. Can't sleep? I asked, my voice a whisper in the large, empty kitchen. She jumped a little, then forced a smile. Just some things on my mind, Valentina. What about you? I shrugged, pouring myself a glass of water. Just tired of all this. I gestured vaguely around. All these rules and lessons. She sighed and patted the chair next to her. I sat down, feeling suddenly very young and very tired. It's for your own good, they say, she murmured, staring at her own untouched tea. But sometimes, I wonder if we're not just preparing you for another kind of prison. I didn't ask what she meant. It seemed too deep, too dark for the night to hold. The next morning, I was supposed to have another language session, but I lingered over breakfast, dreading the return to the dining table turned classroom. Why do I need to learn all this? I asked the guard who watched over the house, and sometimes over me, as if he might have an answer. He just shrugged, his face unreadable. Orders from your father, that's all I know. And there it was again, the weight of silence, pressing down on me, suffocating and impenetrable. As I walked back to the table, the guard's steps echoed behind me, a reminder that even my complaints were monitored, evaluated, and contained within these walls. Days passed, and I grew more resentful, more suffocated by the silence and the secrets. I knew the tutors whispered about me, about my family. I saw the way they looked at me, like I was a bomb that might go off at any mention of the outside world. The days dragged on, each one blending into the next, with the same dreary sameness. I was turning 18 soon, and I could feel the walls of my home closing in on me. Something had to change, or I would suffocate in this golden prison. On the morning of my birthday, my father called me into his study, a room filled with dark wood and darker secrets. Valentina, he began, his voice firm. You are now of age. It's time we discussed your future more seriously. I tensed, knowing that whatever he had planned wasn't going to be something I'd like. "What about my future?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked at me, his gaze calculating. "You will marry Giancarlo Rossi. He's a good man, comes from a strong family. This will be good for us, for our families." I felt my stomach drop. Marry? But I don't even know him. The thought of marrying a stranger, especially one chosen by my father, made me want to run screaming from the room. "It's not a request, Valentina," he said, his voice hardening. "It's decided. You will meet him next week. Be ready." After I left his study, my mind raced with panic and fear. Marry Giancarlo? I couldn't. I wouldn't. I had to get out of here. Over the next few days, I hatched a plan. It was risky, but it was the only shot I had. I approached my father under the guise of acceptance. "Father," I said, trying to sound as meek as I could, "since I am to be married soon, could I perhaps travel to the USA? A kind of pre-wedding trip?" He regarded me suspiciously. "Why the USA?" "I want to see the world a little before I settle down," I lied smoothly. "Just a few weeks. I'll be careful. I promise." He pondered for a moment, then nodded. "Fine. But Marco will go with you. No arguments." Marco was one of his most trusted guards. The man was a mountain, silent and immovable. The challenge just got bigger, but I had no choice. "Thank you, Father," I said, keeping my relief hidden. The following week, as planned, I landed in New York City with Marco shadowing my every move. The city was a breath of fresh air, a stark contrast to the stifling life back home. I knew I had to act fast. One day, while Marco was distracted, I slipped into a store and bought a few essentials, clothes, a wig, and a prepaid phone. Later, at a crowded supermarket, I seized my moment. I feigned interest in some products on a lower shelf, waited for Marco to move ahead, then quickly changed my appearance in the restroom. Heart pounding, I walked right out of the supermarket, another face in the crowd. I didn't stop walking until my legs burned and my breath came in sharp gasps. The first few weeks in New York were a blur. Every day was a battle between the thrill of freedom and the gnawing fear of being caught. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see Marco or someone else from my father's world. But the city was big, noisy, and indifferent, a perfect place to hide. Renting a tiny apartment in a less fashionable part of town was my first step towards a normal life. The building was old and the elevator barely worked, but it was mine. My landlord, a grumpy old man named Mr. Klein, didn't ask many questions. "Just pay your rent on time," he grunted when handing over the keys. Finding a job was harder. My tourist visa was about to expire, and I knew I couldn't work legally. After many days of searching, I found a small cafe willing to pay cash under the table. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get by. The cafe was run by a tough, no-nonsense woman named Gina. On my first day, she eyed me skeptically. "You ever worked a coffee machine before, honey?" I shook my head. "No, but I'm a quick learner." "You better be. I can't afford to babysit," she said, but her tone softened slightly. "All right, I'll show you, but keep up." Working at the cafe was exhausting, but fulfilling. I learned to make coffee the way New Yorkers liked it, strong and fast. The regulars were a mixed bunch, and slowly, I started feeling less like an outsider. One evening, as I was closing up, a customer I recognized as a regular, Mike, lingered at the counter. "You're not from around here, are you?" he asked, his tone friendly but curious. "No, I'm not," I admitted, wiping down the counter. "You got a story, huh?" he pressed, in a way that wasn't prying but seemed genuinely interested. "Doesn't everyone?" I replied, offering a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Mike laughed, a deep, hearty sound. "True enough. Well, if you ever need help or a friend, I'm around. Us New Yorkers gotta stick together." His kindness was unexpected and warmed a corner of my heart. "Thanks, Mike. I might take you up on that." As days turned into weeks, I grew more comfortable in my new skin. But with my visa expired, I was officially an illegal immigrant. The fear of deportation loomed large, a constant shadow over my newfound independence. As time passed, Mike became more than just a friendly face at the cafe. We started seeing each other outside of my shifts, and I found comfort in his easygoing nature and his willingness to listen. One night, over a quiet dinner, I finally spilled my whole story to him, the fear, the flight, everything. Mike listened, his face a mask of concern. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then he reached across the table, took my hand, and squeezed it. "Let's get you sorted," he said. "Marry me. I'll help you stay." It wasn't a declaration of undying love, but it was genuine and it was real, more real than anything I'd hoped for. We got married quietly and moved into his apartment. With my new legal status, I managed to land a job as a saleswoman in an upscale clothing store. My language skills and good manners made me a perfect fit, and for the first time, I felt like I was building something for myself. I was still cautious, still looking over my shoulder, but now I had someone by my side. Someone who knew all of me and stayed. Mike and I settled into a semblance of domesticity, and for a moment, I dared to feel safe, even content. I started social media pages to share snippets of my new, seemingly idyllic life. But that veneer of happiness was thin, easily shattered. One evening, scrolling through social media, my newfound peace crumbled. On Mike's page, there was a photo that caught my eye, a picture of him with another woman, her arms wrapped around him, both smiling broadly at some glittery event. Confusion and a sharp sting of betrayal cut through me. I waited, tense and cold, for him to come home. When he walked through the door, I confronted him immediately, holding up my phone to show him the picture. "Who is she?" My voice was sharp, a knife edge of hurt underlying the question. He looked at the photo and then back at me, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he sighed, a sound of resignation. "That's Lisa," he admitted. "I've been seeing her." The simplicity of his confession, the blunt honesty of it, knocked the wind out of me. "Seeing her? While you're married to me?" I struggled to keep my voice even. "Valentina, I thought you understood," he started, his tone frustratingly calm. "Our marriage, it was more of a convenience, a help. It wasn't meant to be real." "Real?" The word echoed mockingly around the sparse living room. I felt a bitter laugh bubble up. "Not real? You think because you married me to help me out that it gives you the right to, what? Cheat openly? Where does that leave me, Mike?" He shrugged, a gesture that ignited my anger further. "I told you, I don't see this as a real marriage. I thought we had an understanding." "An understanding? No, Mike, you never said you'd humiliate me like this." The hurt was rapidly being replaced by a searing anger. He looked at me hard then. "Valentina, you can always go back to your father if something doesn't suit you." As the days turned into weeks, Mike's behavior worsened. He began to drink more, his temper shortening with each glass. He started ordering me around, his words sharp and commanding. If I protested, he'd remind me of my precarious situation, of the ease with which he could send me back to my father. "You should be grateful," he'd sneer. "I'm your ticket to staying here, remember?" His nights out became more frequent, and I was left alone, wrestling with my thoughts, the loneliness eating at me. Then, one evening, he went too far. Coming home drunk, he threw a demand over his shoulder as he stumbled past me. "Go sleep on the balcony tonight, I don't want to hear you moving around and bothering me." Then, one morning, as if my life needed more complication, I received a message from my father on social media. The message was cold, threatening. "I know where you are. You will come home, or you will suffer the consequences. You have shamed us, running away like a coward. You will be locked away if you force my hand." I showed the message to Mike, hoping, perhaps foolishly, for some semblance of support or protection. Instead, his eyes lit up with a grotesque kind of glee. "This is perfect," he said, grinning. "We can use this." The idea was out of some wild crime drama, but Mike was buzzing with excitement about it. "We're gonna stage your kidnapping. It's foolproof. We demand a ransom from your old man, he pays, and we're set," he explained with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. I stared at him in disbelief. "You can't be serious. This is insane," I protested, the weight of the plan sinking in. "We can't just pretend I'm kidnapped." "What about the consequences?" Mike waved off my concerns with a flick of his hand. "Consequences? Val, look, your father won't ever find out it was us. We'll be long gone with the cash before anything can backfire." I tried again, my voice firm. "I don't want to do this, Mike. It's wrong, and it's dangerous." But Mike wasn't listening. His mind was made up. "It's too late for cold feet," he snapped. He grabbed my phone and locked himself in the bedroom, leaving me pacing the living room, feeling trapped and helpless. Hours later, he emerged with a smug look. "Done," he said, showing me the message he'd sent to my father. It claimed that I had been kidnapped, and the ransom was $1 million. He even managed to take a convincing photo of me, looking distressed and weary, which he attached to the message. Mike was practically bouncing on his heels as he replied, "Now we wait. Once he pays, we can finally get the hell out of here." The waiting was the hardest part. I felt like I was in a bad dream, watching the hours tick by, each minute stretching out endlessly. Mike was glued to his computer, checking the offshore account repeatedly, while I tried to stay out of his way, my anxiety mounting. Then, just a day later, Mike whooped with joy. "He paid. The money's here." His delight was grotesque, as he logged into the account and showed me the balance. $1 million. It was real. This was actually happening. "I'm heading to the bank first thing to get this sorted into cash. We'll need to move fast after that," he said, already grabbing his coat and keys. As the door slammed behind him, I realized that Mike, in his own way, was no different from my father. Here I was, caught between the criminal machinations of my father and the deceitful schemes of my husband. I had escaped one cage only to find myself locked in another. I was throwing my clothes into a bag when I heard Mike's car pull up outside. My heart hammered in my chest as I scrambled to destroy anything that might lead him, or worse, my father, to me. Shredding papers, deleting emails, I was a whirlwind of desperate activity. Just as I zipped up my bag, the door flew open. Mike stumbled in, his eyes glazed over from drink, a wild grin plastered on his face. He dangled his car keys in front of him. "Hey, Val, go fetch us some dinner from that Chinese place, will ya? I'm starved." His slurred words barely registered as I took the keys, my mind racing. This was my chance. Without a word, I bolted for the door, heart pounding as I slipped into the driver's seat of his car. I didn't head for the restaurant. Instead, I drove. The highway stretched out before me like a ribbon of freedom, and I pushed the car faster, watching the city lights blur past. My pulse matched the frantic beat of the tires on the road. I had no destination in mind, just away, anywhere but here. My phone buzzed incessantly in the passenger seat, a relentless reminder of the world I was fleeing. At a red light, I grabbed it, turned it off, and tossed it into a trash can on a deserted street corner. If my father had ways of tracking me, I wouldn't make it easy for him. Hours passed as I drove, the night deepening around me. By the time I pulled into a motel in a small town I didn't know, my nerves were frayed, and exhaustion was setting in. I checked in under a fake name, paid in cash, and collapsed on the bed. Sleep was fitful, filled with nightmares of chases and captures. When morning broke, I was already awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together my next move. I turned on the TV for background noise more than anything else, but froze when a news report caught my attention. Mysterious attack last night in New York City. The victim, identified as Michael Davidson, was found dead in his home, which appeared to have been ransacked by unknown assailants. The breath whooshed out of me. Mike was dead. The reality hit me like a physical blow. Whatever his faults, whatever the mess he'd dragged me into, I hadn't wished him dead. The report speculated that the attackers were searching for something, possibly related to criminal activities. I packed up in a rush, my hands shaking. I needed to get away before anyone connected me to Mike's death. As I loaded the last of my bags into the trunk of the car, a heavy weight settled at the bottom, caught my eye. It was a gym bag I hadn't noticed before. Curious and wary, I unzipped it. Inside, stacks of cash stared back at me, hundreds, thousands, $1 million in crisp bills. The ransom money. Mike must have stashed it here before coming inside last night. For a long moment, I just stared. This money was the cause of all this chaos, the reason Mike was dead, the reason my life was in ruins. But it also represented a chance to start over, to live free from my father's shadow, to compensate for years of fear and manipulation. The nagging fear of my past catching up never completely left me. I made a tough decision, one that went against my morals, but felt necessary for my safety. I underwent plastic surgery and purchased documents in a new name. It was against the law, and the guilt weighed on me, but the fear of my old life, discovering me, was stronger. I reassured myself it was a necessary evil to protect my newfound peace. Finally, I found myself drawn to a small coastal town. I rented a small apartment with a view of the ocean, the soothing sound of the waves a constant reminder of the freedom I now possessed. The first few weeks were tough. I took long walks on the beach, the salty air clearing my mind, helping me to plan. I needed a job, a way to sustain myself without dipping into the gym bag full of cash too often. One morning, while sipping coffee at a local diner, I overheard a conversation from the next table. "We're swamped at the gallery since Jenna left. Can't seem to find anyone who knows their way around handling artwork." Without thinking, I turned and said, "I have experience with that." It wasn't entirely true, but I had helped organize charity art auctions back in the city. The woman looked me over, her eyes sharp but not unkind. "Is that so? You looking for work?" "Yeah, I am," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "Come by tomorrow. Let's see what you've got," she said, handing me a business card. Her brisk, no-nonsense tone reminded me of Gina, but gentler. That conversation turned into a job offer, and suddenly, I found myself working at a local art gallery. It was a small place, but it buzzed with creativity and passion. Months passed, and life found a new rhythm. The fear that had clung to me, shadow-like, began to dissipate. I was no longer looking over my shoulder, no longer jumping at shadows. I started to make friends, real friends who knew nothing of my past, only the person I was now. I had been on my own since my parents passed away while I was in medical school, pushing me to rely solely on myself to carve out a future I could be proud of. After years of non-stop work, scrimping, and saving every extra penny, I finally managed to buy a townhouse. It wasn't just any townhouse, it was the culmination of my blood, sweat, and tears, sitting pretty in a decent neighborhood with a view of a cheerful little kindergarten across the street. The morning I bumped into Mark was like any other, except it wasn't. I'd grabbed my usual coffee from the corner cafe, a place where the barista knew my order by heart and didn't need to ask. Coffee in hand, I was lost in thoughts of my next shift at the hospital when it happened. I turned to leave and collided with someone, sending my hot coffee splashing all over both of us. "Jesus, watch where you're going," the guy exclaimed, a frown creasing his brow as he looked down at his soaked shirt. I felt my cheeks heat up with embarrassment. "Oh my God, I am so sorry. Here, let me help you clean that up," I stammered, feeling around my bag for some napkins, coming up empty. "Great." He sighed, then shook his head as he caught my flustered expression. "It's all right, no harm done. But I'm pretty sure these stains won't just wipe off with a napkin." "You're right, I'm so sorry. There's a laundromat around the corner. I can pay for the cleaning, it's the least I can do." He raised an eyebrow, then a small, amused smirk played on his lips. "Lead the way then, coffee spiller." As we walked to the laundromat, the initial awkwardness gave way to a more relaxed conversation. He introduced himself as Mark, a realtor who had just moved into the area. "What about you? I haven't seen you around before," he said as we handed his shirt over to the laundromat attendant. "I'm Ella," I replied. "I live just a few blocks from here. And yeah, usually I'm holed up at the hospital or resting at home, so not much of a local social butterfly." We sat down at a nearby diner while waiting for his shirt. Over a couple of coffees, carefully kept at a safe distance from him this time, we chatted about mundane things like work and our neighborhood. It was refreshing, talking to someone new without any pretensions. "Look, Ella," he said as we walked back to pick up his shirt, now stain-free, "I owe you one for helping me out. Let me take you out for dinner, my treat. No more coffee disasters, I promise." I hesitated for a split second. He seemed genuine, and after the morning's debacle, I felt like I could use a night out. "Alright, Mark, it's a deal. But if this is some elaborate scheme to get free medical advice, you'll be disappointed. Don't worry, I'll try to keep it strictly non-medical. How's Friday night?" "Friday works. It's a date then," I said, handing him his shirt. We exchanged numbers, and as I watched him go, I couldn't help but think maybe this strange encounter might just be a good thing. After that accidental coffee spill and the subsequent shirt rescue mission, Mark and I began to see more of each other. It started with that promised dinner, which turned out to be a delightful evening at a local Italian place he swore was the best in town. Mark was easy to talk to, and for a guy who sold houses for a living, he sure knew a lot about a lot of things. As the evening wound down, he looked at me, a playful challenge in his eyes. "So, life-changing enough for you?" I laughed, nodding. "Alright, you win this round." The pasta was fantastic. From then on, it seemed like we were inseparable. He was always planning something interesting for us to do, whether it was a movie night, a visit to a local art exhibit, or just a simple walk in the park. Mark had a knack for making everyday things feel special. One evening, as we were walking along the river, watching the city lights reflect on the water, he stopped and looked at me with those earnest eyes of his. "Ella, I've got to tell you something." "What's up?" I asked, feeling a mix of anticipation and nerves. "I'm falling pretty hard for you," he said, his voice low. "And I don't want to scare you off, but I feel like this could be something real." I took a deep breath, the night air cool on my face. "I'm falling too, Mark. And no, you're not scaring me off." A few months into our whirlwind romance, during a cozy dinner at my place, Mark had insisted on cooking to prove he could rival the pasta from our first date. He surprised me with a question that stopped me dead in my tracks. He had just served us some ridiculously good lasagna when he turned to me, took my hands in his, and said, "Ella, I know it's been a quick ride for us, but when you know, you just know. Marry me?" I didn't need time to think about it, it felt right. "Yes, Mark. Yes, I'll marry you." That night, we talked about our future, about finding a place together, and starting a family. Everything felt like it was falling into place, and I couldn't remember the last time I had been this happy. However, the arrival of Mark's parents from Thailand just before our wedding brought a shift I hadn't anticipated. They had lived abroad for many years but decided to return permanently when they heard about their son's imminent wedding. At first, they seemed lovely, full of warm smiles and enthusiastic embraces. "We're so thrilled to finally meet the woman who captured our Mark's heart," his mother had gushed, squeezing my hands with both of hers. His father, a robust man with a hearty laugh, clapped Mark on the shoulder, saying, "You've chosen well, son. We're excited to be part of this joyous occasion." Their friendliness was comforting, and I felt hopeful about our new family dynamics. But their initial friendliness soon gave way to an overwhelming sense of intrusion. Linda, Mark's mother, took to our home like she owned the place, and her husband, Jim, wasn't far behind in making his presence felt. It started with small things. Linda would rearrange my kitchen whenever she came over, which was almost every day. "Ella, you really should keep the spices near the stove. Saves time," she would say, moving things around without waiting for my response. I bit my tongue, trying to keep the peace. Then came the comments about how I managed the house. One afternoon, while I was trying to relax with a book, Linda plopped down next to me and sighed. "You know, dear, it wouldn't hurt to dust a bit more often. And maybe some fresh flowers would brighten up the place. It looks a bit drab." Jim had his own way of butting in. He'd follow Mark around, questioning his decisions about work and our finances. I overheard him one day in the garage, his voice stern. "You're letting her handle the money? You need to keep an eye on that, son. Make sure it's spent wisely." Their constant presence was suffocating, but the breaking point came when Linda decided we should host a party for her friends, without even asking us. "It'll be just a small gathering," she assured, waving her hand dismissively as if it was no big deal. When I tried to talk to Mark about it, hoping he would intervene, he just shrugged. "Mom likes to host. Let her have this one. It makes her happy, and it's not like it's a huge imposition, right?" I gave in. The small gathering turned out to be a full-blown bash with more than 20 people, all from Linda's circle of friends, who seemed to think they were at some sort of weekly social club that just happened to be in my living room. I spent the whole day cooking and preparing, only to end up feeling like a stranger at my own party. Linda introduced me around as if she was the lady of the house, and I was just some sort of assistant. "Ella helped out," she would say, patting my arm while her friends nodded politely before turning back to her. The final straw was when I heard one of her friends, a loud woman with a booming laugh, comment, "Linda, you've got this place whipped into shape. Mark was smart to bring you back here." I clenched my fists, my face hot with embarrassment and rage. As soon as the last guest left, I turned to Mark. "This can't happen again. It's not okay, and you know it." He looked tired, rubbing his forehead. I know. It's just. Mom can be a lot. But what am I supposed to do? She's my mom." "But I'm your wife," I shot back, the hurt clear in my voice. "That should count for something, shouldn't it?" He didn't have an answer for me, and that night, I lay awake, wondering if this was how the rest of my life would look. Sidelined in my own home, bending backward to accommodate people who clearly had no respect for my boundaries. Saturday after Saturday, my house transformed into a hub for Linda's endless social gatherings. Every week, the invasion of her friends, along with their opinions and laughter, grated on me more. It wasn't just the noise or the mess, it was the sheer disregard for our personal space. And each event left me feeling more like an outsider in my own home. The day I put my foot down, everything blew up. I told Linda politely but firmly, "I'm sorry, but we can't host the party every Saturday. It's too much." She stared at me like I'd slapped her. Her reaction was immediate and volcanic. "Too much? You ungrateful girl, this is what family does for each other. We host, we entertain, we support." Her voice rose with each word, and I felt the walls of my own home closing in on me. "Linda, please lower your voice. Let's talk about this calmly." But calm was nowhere on her agenda. Her face turned a shade of red I'd only seen in movies. She started pacing around, waving her arms, and then, to my horror, she began throwing decorative cushions across the room as if each one bore my face. "You listen here. If you don't agree to these small favors, I can make things very difficult for you, my girl." She was shouting now, and her words sliced through any pretense of familial warmth we might have had. When she threatened to have me divorced from her son if I didn't comply, a cold shiver ran down my spine. "Mark will listen to me. He always has. Don't think he'll choose you over his own mother." I was reeling. The woman was using divorce as a weapon to keep me in line. It hit me then, how deeply Mark was tied to his mother's apron strings. The realization was like a punch to the gut. Mark, hearing the commotion, rushed into the room. "Mom, what's going on here?" He looked from his fuming mother to me, his eyes wide with confusion. "Your wife is being unreasonable, Mark. I'm only asking for a little cooperation, and she's denying us that." Mark glanced at me, his face pleading for peace. "Ella, can't we just..." No, Mark, we can't. My voice was firm, stronger than I felt. This isn't about a party. It's about respect and boundaries. Your mother just threatened to break us up. Mark's eyes flickered with shock, first at me, then at his mother. Mom, you didn't. Linda's gaze didn't waver, she was ready for battle. I did, and I will if she doesn't start showing some respect around here. She turned around and left the room, slamming the door loudly. Taking a deep breath, I made a choice, a radical one. Mark, I think we need to separate. Not for real, just on paper. We need to show your mom that we make our decisions together, not under duress. It took a lot of convincing, a lot of tearful discussions, and heartfelt promises that this was just a tactic, not the end for us. So, we did. We filed for divorce quietly, a sham for freedom. It was the hardest decision of my life, pretending to split from the man I loved to save our marriage from the overbearing clutches of his mother. The next Saturday, when Linda and her entourage of friends showed up at the house for their usual gathering, they were in for a surprise. I was waiting for them on the front porch, my posture rigid and my resolve firm. As Linda stepped out of her car, her smile faded when she saw me standing alone, door firmly shut behind me. Ella, dear, aren't you going to let us in? We have our little gathering, remember? Her voice carried that familiar commanding tone, but today, I was not going to yield. No, Linda. There won't be any gathering here today. Or any other day, I replied, my voice steady. She stared at me, her eyes narrowing. What are you talking about? This is my son's house, and I decide. It was your son's house. I corrected her sharply, cutting off her words. And as of last week, it's mine alone. We're divorced, Linda. Mark isn't living here anymore, and he won't be a part of these gatherings. Her mouth fell open, disbelief etching her features. Divorced? That's not possible. Mark would never. He did, Linda. And he agreed it was for the best, I said, not letting her intimidate me anymore. The power I felt at that moment, reclaiming my space and my life, was exhilarating. This is nonsense, she exclaimed, her voice rising. I'll call him right now. He'll straighten this out. Linda fumbled with her phone, her fingers shaking slightly as she dialed Mark. I could hear the dial tone, then Mark's voice answering. The conversation was brief, and Linda's face fell with each word Mark spoke. Turning back to me, her eyes filled with fury, she hissed, "You're ruining our family. You have no idea what you've just started." I know exactly what I'm doing, Linda. I'm ending the chaos you bring into my life every week. This is my home, and I will not be hosting or accommodating your social life anymore. The other women, who had been watching the exchange with rapt attention, began to murmur among themselves, their eyes darting between Linda and me. With a huff, Linda turned on her heel, her friends trailing behind her like lost puppies. They got into their cars and drove off, leaving a cloud of dust and a profound silence behind. After the sham divorce, Mark and I maintained our relationship secretly, meeting in less conspicuous places and spending time together like two teenagers sneaking around. It was absurd and painful, but necessary. One chilly evening, Mark texted me, "Meet me at the Old Town Diner. The one with the busted neon sign. Need to see you." Reading his message, I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. I threw on my coat and headed out, making sure to keep my head down as I walked into the diner. It was a quiet place, mostly forgotten by the town's newer residents, which made it perfect for us. As I slid into the booth across from Mark, I could see he was tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than I remembered. "Hey," I whispered, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "Hey," he whispered back, a small smile breaking through his fatigue. "I've missed you." "Me too," I said, my heart aching a bit. "How are you holding up?" Mark sighed, his gaze dropping to our intertwined hands. "It's been hard, Ella. Not seeing you, not being able to just come home. Mom's been, well, she's been herself." I nodded, knowing all too well how overbearing Linda could be. But we're doing the right thing, right? Keeping our distance, for now, to make her see we're serious about needing space? Yeah, we are. It's just tougher than I thought. Mark squeezed my hand a little tighter. But how about you? How have you been handling the house all alone? I shrugged. It's been okay. Quiet. Peaceful, even. I just miss having you there. The house feels empty without you. The waitress came by then, dropping off 2 mugs of coffee and a plate of fries. We both thanked her and waited for her to leave before continuing. Ella, I've been thinking, Mark said, breaking a fry in half. Maybe we should start looking for a place of our own. Somewhere new, where we can start fresh, away from all this drama. A new place. The idea was both thrilling and daunting. I like that idea, but what about the money? And the house? We'll figure it out, he said confidently. I can handle the house, maybe even talk to a realtor about putting it on the market. As for money, well, we've always been good at managing that together. True, I agreed, feeling a spark of hope at the thought of a new beginning just for us. Let's do it. Let's find our own place, something that's just ours. We spent the next hour talking about potential areas to live in, types of houses we liked, and how we'd decorate our new place. It felt good to dream together, to plan a future that seemed a little brighter than the past few months had been. When it was time to leave, we stood outside the diner, the cool air making me shiver slightly. Mark took off his jacket and draped it over my shoulders. I've got you, he said softly, pulling me into a hug. I know, I whispered back, holding him tight. And I've got you, too. We parted ways that night with a plan in mind, our spirits lifted by the promise of a new start. It wouldn't be easy, but with Mark by my side, I felt like we could handle anything. Even Linda. A year later, our persistence paid off. I had managed to save enough money, and Mark, using his skills as a realtor, found us the perfect place. It was a large, beautiful house in a wonderful area with a stunning garden. To celebrate and cement our reunion, we decided to get married again in a small, secret ceremony. It was just us and a couple of close friends who knew about our situation. As we exchanged vows for the second time, the weight of the past year seemed to lift. There were still remnants of our old life at the townhouse that we needed to gather up. We decided one Saturday morning to make the trip back to our old place and pick up the last few items. As we pulled up to the townhouse, I noticed a familiar car parked outside. It was Linda and Jim. They were standing by the front door, apparently waiting for us. When we got out of the car, Linda's face lit up with an unsettling kind of eagerness. We need to discuss the family get-togethers. Now that you're returning, we can start planning the next one right here. Mark's brow furrowed. Mom, we're not here to stay. We're just picking up some things. We've moved out. Her smile faltered for a moment, but quickly recovered. Moved out? Oh, but that means this place is free. I can use it for the parties then. It was like nothing had changed with her. I felt a flare of frustration, but kept my voice calm. Linda, we sold the townhouse. It's not ours anymore. We're here to collect the last of our things. The news seemed to take a moment to sink in. Linda's face went from confusion to shock, and then to a frown. Sold? But where will you live? Where will we have our gatherings? Mark took a step forward, his tone firmer. Mom, the townhouse is no longer our concern. And we're not disclosing where our new house is. I'm sorry for how things went before, but now, we're starting fresh. It's time for you and Dad to consider doing the same. Maybe travel again, like you used to. Linda's mouth opened and closed, her earlier enthusiasm dampened into a muted disbelief. Jim, who had been quietly observing the exchange, put a hand on her shoulder, but she shrugged it off, her gaze fixed on Mark. You're choosing her over your own family? Linda's voice cracked, a mix of anger and hurt. Mark nodded. Yes, Mom, I am choosing my wife. It's not about picking sides, it's about respecting our life together. Before Linda could say another word, Mark kissed my hands, an affirmation of his commitment in front of his parents. Linda stood frozen, her face a mask of frustration and disbelief. Jim seemed to realize the argument was lost and gently urged her back towards their car. After settling into our new home, the peace and quiet I had longed for felt like it was finally within reach. Mark and I reveled in our newfound privacy, cherishing the freedom that came with it. However, Linda wasn't ready to let us go without a fight. Her obsession with controlling us reached new heights when she started calling our friends, desperately trying to find out where we lived. Thankfully, our friends understood the situation and kept our new address confidential, supporting our decision to keep our lives private. Linda's frustration grew with each unsuccessful attempt, and soon she resorted to more direct confrontations. The phone calls began to increase, each one more demanding and invasive than the last. Mark and I decided early on that engaging with her would only encourage her behavior, so we started to ignore the calls. This seemed to infuriate her even more, pushing her to take drastic measures. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at the hospital, I was walking to my car when I spotted Linda lurking near the staff parking lot. My heart sank as I realized she was waiting for me. As I approached, her face twisted into a mix of anger and determination. "Ella, you can't ignore me forever. Tell me where you live." Her voice was sharp, cutting through the quiet evening air. I kept my distance, my hand inching towards my phone. "Linda, this needs to stop. You're not welcome here, and you're certainly not welcome in our lives if you continue this behavior." She scoffed, stepping closer, her presence more threatening. "You think you can just shut me out? Mark is my son. I have rights." I could feel my patience wearing thin, and my concern for my own safety growing. "If you don't leave right now, I'm calling security. This is harassment, Linda." Her eyes narrowed, not believing I would take a stand. "You wouldn't dare." Without another word, I pulled out my phone and dialed security. Within minutes, a security officer arrived, and I quickly explained the situation. Linda was still ranting as the officer approached us. The security officer stepped in, firmly. "Ma'am, you need to leave the premises now. You are causing a disturbance." Linda's face flushed with anger, but the presence of security seemed to push her back into reality. She glanced between me and the officer, her resolve faltering. "This isn't the end," she muttered, but her voice lacked conviction as she turned and hurried away. After the incident, I warned her that if she approached me again, I would not hesitate to involve the police and press charges for harassment. It seemed my firm stance finally made an impact. Linda's attempts to contact us abruptly stopped. Weeks later, Mark and I were relieved to hear from a mutual friend that Linda and Jim had decided to move back to Thailand permanently. The news brought a profound sense of relief. It felt like the final cloud hanging over our new life had been lifted, allowing us to truly start afresh.